them at the worst parts, the best parts. This is the best of the rest.
Hello, and we repeat, the Superman exists, and he is American. This is Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at superhero movies that were poorly received upon release, but only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's sometimes a challenge, but always a good time, and this week, we are talking Watchmen. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by the man who is a podcaster by day and comic book reader by night, Andrew Williams. Are you ready to dive into this one, Andrew?
I am. It has been a while since I've watched the theatrical, so I'm excited to talk about it.
Same. Yeah, I think this might literally be since theaters, since I have watched the theatrical, but let's go ahead and jump into it. What is your history, not only with this movie, but with the story of Watchmen?
Well, I read the comic. When I got into comics, I was in the late 90s. And so as you get to be an adult and you kind of start trying to find the cool comics, Watchmen is always the one you hear. You know, you walk into a comic book store, you ask for recommendations, it's Watchmen. Everybody tells you to watch Watchmen. Read Watchmen, not watch Watchmen. And so I read it probably in the early 2000s, probably right around when I went to college, so 2005 or so. And then they were going to make the movie, and I was pretty stoked about that. So I did see it in theaters. I remember seeing it in theaters, maybe not an opening night type situation, but I think it definitely was an opening weekend type situation. And I've watched it over the years in its various forms. Typically, the Ultimate Cut is the one that I remember buying, like the super intense box set when it came out that had like the holographic front cover where they would switch between the comic book characters and the regular characters. Had a copy of the book in it, I think. And
yeah, I've got the exact same box set.
Yeah, watched that one, the 4-hour version, a lot. Haven't gone back to the old ones, though, although I might watch the director's cut after this. But yeah, so definitely been around my life, stayed in my life, and it's been something that I've gone back to fairly regularly.
Yeah, I saw this movie in theaters. I didn't hear about Watchmen until I saw The Dark Knight. Opening night, there's the trailer for this movie, Watchmen, a very cool trailer that is very memorable. And I'm like, who are these characters? What is this? I think the trailer even proclaims the greatest, or based on the greatest graphic novel of all time, or something very gaudy like that. And I'm like, I haven't even heard of this. Now, at the time, I was mostly just reading Batman comics. I wasn't super into comics, but I started looking into it. I bought the book, I read it, and started to kind of get hyped for this movie. And as I got more into comic books, like you said, this is like the comic to read for like adult readers or mature readers, or we want to read, one of the most important comic books in comic book history. It gets put up there a lot with The Dark Knight Returns as far as being responsible for like maturing of comic books and kind of being for older audiences as well as kids. And it's got its place in history. And I read the story, saw the movie, like opening weekend, somewhere around then, and I enjoyed it. When it first came to home video, is that still the right thing to say, home video? when it was released on, DVD and Blu-ray and everything, I almost immediately watched the director's cut, because that came out, if not the same day, pretty recently after the theatrical was released. Yeah. And I enjoyed those extended scenes, and that's how I've watched it ever since then. Or the Ultimate Cut we talked about with Tales of the Black Freighter integrated into the movie, which is nearly 4-hour experience. So I don't watch it, every month, but about like every 18 months, I would say. I'm like, you know what? I could do the Watchmen again. Now, our show, Best of the Rest, it's about poorly received superhero movies. This movie isn't maybe the worst received we've covered, but I think it is undoubtedly a mixed reception for various reasons, whether taken at face value as a film or in relation to how it's adapted from the comics. People tend to have very strong feelings about that. Now, that's not what we're going to do in this episode. We're going to celebrate the high points and the positives, because that's what we do here. #Positivity Podcast. And whenever we talk about this movie, we are joined by a special guest this week. Bob Buel, host of the wonderful 99 Questions podcast, is going to be talking the movie with us. I love this man's energy. I am excited to talk with him. He's got a real chill vibe, and he's just really the sweetheart of podcasting. can't wait to jump into it. But Andrew, I want to ask you this. You've watched this movie off and on throughout the years.
Sure.
And again, we're leaning towards the positives here. That's what we're talking about. But has your feelings on this movie changed over the years from seeing it day one to watching it a few years later, revisiting it? Has it kind of fluctuated maybe up and down?
Probably a little bit. And definitely rewatching the theatrical today, there are definitely things that didn't hold up like I thought they would. There were things that I didn't really notice the first time that stood out to me a lot more. I don't know if that's me aging. I don't know if that's what I'm looking for in a film has changed. I don't know what it is, but it's definitely a different experience watching it now than it was when I first watched it, which you'll find later in some of my favorite characters and scenes.
Oh, well, a little tease for our talk here. Well, let's start here. The movie was released March 6th of 2009. It was made on a budget of $135 million, so the studio was definitely all in on this adaptation. At the box office, however, it only brings in $185 million. Probably covering that production cost, but certainly is not making a significant profit for the studio. And like we mentioned, the reception is more mixed. Rotten Tomatoes has it at just a 65% critic score, which is certified fresh, but honestly barely into that territory.
Right. Now, this was obviously, we won't go too heavy into this. This could be its own episode on its own. This was a long time coming to get to theaters. This was a movie that literally, I think the film rights were acquired literally in August 86, possibly even before the comic was finished coming out. Like, I don't remember when that last issue comes out, but like, over the years, several different things were attempted, notably Sam Hamm, who would go on to write Batman, would write a script. Terry Gilliam came in to direct at one point, and just, it was decades on and off.
Look, hashtag positivity podcast, but I can't tell you how much I would not want to sit through a Terry Gilliam adaptation of Watchmen.
I'm kind of the opposite. Like, Terry Gilliam right after Brazil, that's when he should have made Watchmen. I would have been okay with that. Terry Gilliam now, maybe not. But then like Darren Aronofsky was attached at one point. And then the casts, God, look at some of these cast listings. I mean, there are just almost anyone who's anyone was attached to Watchmen at some point.
I believe Tom Cruise actively pursued the role of Ozymandias.
Tom Cruise apparently met with Zack Snyder. Like, John Cusack apparently really wanted Dan Dreiberg.
I can see that one. John Cusack as Night Owl. I can see that.
Jude Law as Ozymandias was another one. And so, yeah, it took a long time to get there. And then finally, it's Zack Snyder that apparently gets the studio's faith while he's making 300. Like you mentioned to me before, that he gets this gig before 300 is even out.
Yeah, that's wild. So what is it really based on? I mean, he had directed Dawn of the Dead, which, I really like that movie. I think it's one of his best directorial efforts, but I don't watch that and think, oh yeah, this is our Watchmen guy.
Do Watchmen.
I can understand seeing 300 and especially the reception to it, which was a very well-liked movie, and thinking that, oh, he's adapted a comic book, he can do it again. But yeah, while he's shooting that, so I don't know if they're looking at the dailies that are coming in and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, this is looking promising. I don't know, but kudos to him. They gave him the keys to the kingdom, and the thing finally got made. It kind of seemed like once he was in position, things started rolling, and we got this adaptation finally.
We did, and you could think about what one of it, like what does a Terry Gilliam Watchmen look like? What does a Darren Aronofsky Watchmen look like? What does a Paul Green? What do those things look like? And yeah, it's fun to think about it, but David Hayter's script and Zack Snyder directing apparently was the combination to get it done. And this probably the only shot you're going to get. And I think they did a pretty good stab at it.
Yeah, I mean, especially this casting. These actors, I should say, are all now synonymous with the characters, up and down the cast list. So It would be very bizarre to see anyone else step into those costumes.
And in some cases, we have, through like later media, the Watchmen television show has some of these characters in it. And, very notably features Jeremy Irons as an aged Ozymandias. And I mean, no offense to Matthew Good, I also really liked Jeremy Irons in that role as
a Mark Strong Award winner, Jeremy Irons.
Yes, Mark Strong Award winner, Jeremy Irons.
Yeah, some respect on the name.
Yeah, my apologies, but like he takes on, because the Watchmen show is set in present day, as a sequel to the comic. So it's an Ozymandias 35 years later. And, how did his plan work? How did it go? But thankfully that show does stray away from some of the more synonymous roles. It avoids a lot of those issues, but for a lot of these people, it's an uphill battle to try to see somebody else jumping into that.
Well, let's jump into it ourselves. Let's talk about those performances and talk about our favorite scenes of the movie with our special guest. In an alternate version of 1980s America, masked heroes have been outlawed after being an integral part of the country's history for decades. When a retired masked hero known as the Comedian is murdered, the vigilante Rorschach visits former teammates Night Owl, Silk Spectre, and Dr. Manhattan to warn that they could be next. After discovering that another former peer named Ozymandias was behind the murders, Rorschach and Night Owl visit a secret base in the Arctic to confront him. They are soon joined by the other heroes when Ozymandias executes his master plan, killing millions in the process. It's a dense story we have here, fellas. I wrote the synopsis, and there's entire subplots that aren't even mentioned there, but I could be reading this thing for 30 minutes. You could fill a book, one would say, with the plot of this movie. Okay, thank you. With that acknowledgement,
he wasn't going to move on until somebody.
I am a very needy person. The entire reason we have this podcast is that I can get, that kind of feedback.
Craves validation.
Yes, and this episode, we invited someone to help give me some of that validation. His name is Bob Buel. He's here in the virtual studio with us. Fantastic man, the sweetheart of podcasting, some would say. I love this fella, host of the excellent 99 Questions podcast. Bob, thank you so much for joining us today.
What kind words. What an intro. Holy cow. The sweetheart, America's sweetheart himself, Bob Buel, in studio. Thank you so much.
I promise you, anyone that's ever heard your voice has had the exact same thought. So just a total joy to have on. I love your show. I love your podcast. I love your energy. And I'm excited to have you on here. We are, of course, a hashtag positivity podcast. And I think you're going to fit right in with our show talking about Watchmen. Now, Andrew and I already talked about kind of our history with this movie and when we first saw it. So get us up to speed here, Bob. Whenever I asked you, hey, would you like to be on our show? You very nicely said yes. And you almost immediately said, I would like to talk about Watchmen. So why did that come to mind? What's your history with this movie?
Well, I saw it in the theater when it came out. I never read the graphic novel. Before or after, I've been tempted a couple times. I've seen it in stores.
So even as of today, you have not read the book?
I have not. I've read a Wikipedia plot summary, which is probably,
the modern day Cliff Note, sure.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like I got a gist of it. But no, I saw the movie when it came out in theaters. I really liked it. And then I remember reading a bunch of reviews about it and them kind of poo-pooing on it a little bit. And I think some fair, some a little, I don't know, a little unfair, I dare say.
Sure.
This is just a movie I've always kind of defended over the years. I never really watched it a ton, but I really enjoyed it. And on this rewatch, I still really enjoy it. I gotta say. I think they're definitely, again, keeping it positive. There are a lot of parts of this movie that I think still hold up, even in today's kind of every other movie is a superhero movie.
Sure.
I think this really twists a lot of things on its head in very interesting ways, especially in when there's a lot of Marvel stuff out there. And believe me, I love that stuff. But there are sometimes it can get very formulaic.
There's a reason Baskin-Robbins has 31 flavors, right? I mean, chocolate's great, but you don't want it every single time you get ice cream. So
100%.
Variety, it's the spice of life, to mix some more food metaphors in there. I agree. I enjoy this movie, and you're right. It's not the worst reviewed movie that we've covered on this podcast. It's technically certified fresh, barely, but I think mixed reception is the best way to look at it, because there doesn't seem to be a single review out there or commentary that doesn't at least dive into some major criticisms or differences in the books. And, you know what? Those talks are out there. Today, this talk, it's all about the high points and the positives. And as always, we are starting with the cast of the movie and the performances, and specifically the best casting and best performance of the movie. Every episode, we recognize one person who goes above and beyond with their performance to elevate the quality of the entire film with what they are doing on screen. We recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. Andrew, let's start with you. Who gets your Mark Strong Award for Watchmen?
Well, there's a lot of... I don't want to steal anybody's thunder, but there's an obvious choice that a lot of people gravitate to when talking about the cast of this movie. I think there is one performance in particular that people tend to highlight as one of the high points. I'm not going with that one. Because rewatching this movie, I actually really like this performance because it's oddly been in this vein of things that I've been rewatching recently, and actually in some of the stuff that we've watched recently. But I'm actually giving the Mark Strong Award to Patrick Wilson as Daniel Dryberg / Night Owl II. I like Patrick Wilson a lot. Obviously, he's no stranger to continued superhero fare. Obviously, showing up in the cinematic masterpiece Aquaman, as well as its sequel. Not as Aquaman, oddly enough. Even though I still
haven't seen Aquaman. We've talked about it on this podcast. You say it's great. There's an octopus that plays the drums. I gotta watch that.
Any movie that has an octopus that plays the drums is gonna be in the running for the greatest film of all time. But
I'm sold. I mean,
I'm
in.
What more do you need? Julie Andrews voices a giant crab. Like, these are the things that the world needs more of.
Those should be the only two things on the poster. I would have been first day.
But I like Patrick Wilson a lot, from whether it's stuff in Insidious, every type of role he does. But what he's doing here is he's kind of like, I've been watching a lot of movies lately where they're taking objectively attractive people and like muddying them up as much as possible to make them look as sad as possible. I mentioned
Schlubbification. Yes.
Yeah, like I mentioned, Stallone in Copland is a lot like this, where here's this man that's ripped to the gills that we're making look as pathetic as possible, and then it happens in Catwoman to a degree as well, and we just kind of went down this trail. But so here, he genuinely put on weight for this. Like, he gained like 25 pounds to kind of look more out of shape as Night Owl, but he's giving this very distant performance, and I think it's kind of underrated. I think he's got this sadness and this kind of directionless aim that he's got in the aftermath of not really being able to be Night Owl anymore. He's not really sure who he is. He's not really sure where he fits in the world. And overall, I think he has a really good arc in this movie of rediscovering who he is, rediscovering his confidence. And I think Patrick Wilson plays that to a T. So, I'm giving it to Patrick Wilson.
I think that's an excellent choice. I mean, this cast rules. I think it's a almost perfectly cast movie. You could have said anybody, and I'd be like, yeah, Andrew, great choice. I think I know who you're talking about, where the one person that gets called out a lot for being the best performance, but I think it's a pretty close race. And Patrick Wilson, this was my introduction to the man. I think it's the first thing I remember seeing him in, but he's been in everything. So he really blew up after this movie. But I love what he's doing here. He's so dorky and has like this old soul. Like, whenever he's talking to the original Night Owl, who's an old man, they almost like peers the way they swap stories. And some of his line delivery, just the decisions that he makes, almost like he's the dad of the group. I really love the one where, of course, comedian is, drunk and being belligerent at the meeting. And he just very politely says, maybe we should agree on no drinking at meetings. Just being like very the diplomat, the dad, trying to keep everybody in line. And he's got those big old glasses on. I love it. Great casting. Great choice. Bob, how about you, sir? Who gets your Mark Strong Award?
I might have to go the obvious, but the one that really knocked my socks off upon rewatching. I totally agree. I think a lot of this cast is really, really strong. And I have a couple, special nominations that
we're gonna go through all of them. That's all right. We'll talk about all of them.
But mine for sure is Jeffrey Dean Morgan as the comedian. I think he just knocks it out of the park. Personally, he is such a good, just scumbag in this movie. Just a checklist of hateable characteristics for a character, and he gets them all, and it's somehow still kind of charismatic, and by the end, like a little bit sympathetic. Like, when they're going through the whole thing of him going to Moloch's apartment and just like breaking down crying because he's figured it out, but he doesn't have any friends to go to anymore. Like, there's something innately tragic about that, even when they have multiple scenes showing him doing these atrocities across the world. I think that really speaks to how well he played that role.
It is a tall order to take this character.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they don't hint at the horrible things that he does. They show you very graphically. So you see this man on screen do these horrible things. But yeah, by the end, I mean, I wouldn't say anybody's rooting for him per se, but there's definitely empathy. And that is, hats off to Jeffrey Dean Morgan, because that is not an easy thing to pull off. If you cast someone in this role that was maybe more known for being like a straight up villain or, kind of has that look, I don't think it would ultimately work. But something about what he's doing here, he's like, he reminds me of like John Hamm, but like on the other side of the railroad tracks. He's like the dark version of John Hamm. So I think he pulls it off. It's an excellent choice. Andrew, was that what you were alluding to? Whereas
it was not actually.
Oh, really?
But,
okay, well, look at that. That's who I thought you might have been alluding to.
No, but I do love this performance a lot because, like you said, it's all of these terrible things, but there's still this charisma, and like you said, there's still this almost empathy for the character of like, wow, you've been through all of these tragic, awful things, and maybe it's not entirely your fault that you're like this. Because that's kind of one of the, I mean, you could say it's a theme of the whole thing, that superheroes kind of have some problems, but but he plays this to a T. This was, I think, the first thing I saw him in, and then, like, I've liked almost everything he's been in afterwards. He's been this, anytime he's in something, I always try to give it a look, just because I think he's got this charisma, even if it's, not necessarily the pieces around him are the best. But yeah, he's doing a great job here with like we said, a very difficult character to find that balance for, and he does a great job.
Yeah, I think a lesser actor in this role could have bombed out the whole movie, because like, if you don't have that linchpin character, and he really is, like, from the opening scene, that's why they're doing this, is because he was murdered in that opening scene. He is the linchpin of the whole movie, and if it were someone less sympathetic, less charismatic, it wouldn't have worked. I just don't think it would have worked.
The best part is, like, he almost didn't do it, because when he was reading the comic, he saw the character was killed off like 3 pages in, and he was like, oh, well, I'm not going to play a character. But then he went and read the whole thing, and he realized he's the linchpin of this entire movie. Yeah. And he holds the whole thing together. Like you said, he's the precipice for the events of what's happening. The death of the comedian, spoilers, folks, is what kicks this movie and its events off. And he, like I said, does a great job with it.
Well, for my Mark Strong award, now I'm wondering if I'm doing the obvious one.
I feel like I'm going going because I thought
this
there was
big
one
mystery
built
up.
We all have different obvious answers, but none of us are. I love that.
My Mark Strong award winner is Jackie Earle Haley.
There it is.
As Walter Kovac / Rorschach. Yeah, I mean, I love all these performances, but before I jump into this performance, let me ask this. Rorschach is my favorite character in Watchmen. Does that line up for you guys? Andrew, is your favorite character Night Owl 2? And Bob, is your favorite character the comedian?
Ooh, that's an interesting question.
I would say, and just to be clear, yeah, like, I remember when this movie came out, like, everybody raved about Jackie Earle Haley as Rorschach. Like, that's what I remember hearing that a lot. That people were like, this guy crushed it. And was definitely one of the things that kept, they were like, he's one of the highlights of the movie. But I don't know, like, I feel like there was a time where Rorschach probably would have been my favorite character in Watchmen, but watching it now, he definitely isn't. And maybe that's just me getting older, but yeah, I think.
And to be clear, your favorite character doesn't mean the one that you think is the best person. that's
yeah,
Bob. I assume you don't think the comedian is the role model of this movie, but still, the performance maybe the character you appreciate the most. Does it line up with who you think the best actor is?
I think you if you asked me if Dan was my favorite character in Watchmen now, I would have to think about who else it might be. So yeah, I'll say that tracks.
It might be true. I think upon a rewatch, Dr. Manhattan might also be really high up there for me. But it's a 1 or 2 race for sure. So
Yeah.
I think it about lines up.
Well, the reason I'm going Jackie Earle Haley, one, I think he's got a pretty tall order in a different way than what Jeffrey Dean Morgan had. But most of this time, he's giving it's more than a voice performance because he's, physically acting things out, but his face is completely covered. And he does have the moving Rorschach test on his mask that they very cleverly insinuate different facial expressions, like his eyes widening and things like that. But that's not him giving the performance. It's mainly through his voice, which I don't know how many packs of cigarettes this dude is smoking a day to pull that off.
You
I know
smoke
he
cigarettes or do you eat them?
He almost immediately went to being Freddy Krueger, which makes a ton of sense. But he, it's almost like it's a very good, like, Clint Eastwood impression, right? It's just constantly like in that register. And at the same time, just like we're talking about these other characters, you see his backstory and how horrible his upbringing was and the things that he had to deal with in his line of work as a vigilante. And it's like, you get it. You don't agree. This wouldn't be you probably, but like someone put through these circumstances, I can see how they would end up being essentially the Punisher. I mean, that's basically what what this character is. And then he gets this whole section in prison with his mask off, and he gets probably the most badass line of the entire movie, which I'm sure we'll jump to later. But he gets to give a performance with his actual face, and then the finale of the movie is what really seals it for me. Spoilers for the next movie. Let's just jump into it. He gets killed by Dr. Manhattan. He knows it's coming, and he's just telling him, like, get it over with. Be a man of your conviction. Do it. And at first, he's almost overcome with emotion, and then he just like finds his resolve, and he just demands Dr. Manhattan to do it. He channels his inner Shia LaBeouf and do it, But it's so good, and I'm making a joke about it now, but it's like it hits me emotionally every single time I've seen this movie, which I've seen this movie a lot. And that is then followed right by your Mike Strong Award winners, screaming no, much better than Darth Vader. Also very emotional, dropping to his knees. That climax is so good. And yeah, ultimately I'm going with Jackie Earle Haley. All of these picks, I mean, they all make sense as a Mark Strong Award winner. I really think it comes down to maybe not just a little bit of personal preference. Like, I just really like the character of Rorschach, and that's kind of what edges him out versus these other picks. But they are all fantastic. This cast is incredible.
Yeah, I expected going in that I was going to say Rorschach. Like, that was like my memory, because I have not watched actually the theatrical of this film in a long time. It's usually either the director's cut, which I think is Snyder's preferred version, or the ultimate cut in case I have 17 hours I need to kill. But I went in expecting to be like, oh yeah, it's Rorschach. Because that was, like I said, that was in the aftermath of this movie coming out in the years since, like, that's the one performance I feel like everybody raved about. Like I said, we'll talk about his iconic scenes later. But I think he gets a lot of the best bits. And I think that's part of it. But watching it was obviously it's still a fantastic performance. I think maybe I've aged and changed, and like you said, maybe Rorschach's not my favorite character anymore, and that colored it. But it's still like a tour de force. Like, this is a dude that's like like him and Morgan both are like, I don't know if these dudes like lived with that book, but like anytime I read anything related to Watchmen now, those are the voices I hear in my head for these characters. Oh, yeah. Like, it's that attached to me. And Zack Snyder's son Eli plays young Walter Kovacs, which is pretty cool. So,
he gets to bite his cheek off of the bully.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. That's awesome.
Snyder just putting his kid right in the action.
Well, let's round out this cast. We have Billy Crudup as John Osterman, better known as Dr. Manhattan. Another fantastic performance. Now, this one is much more a voice performance. He does mocap, but still, for the most part, it's that beautiful, smooth Billy Crudup voice that is carrying this, the voice of MasterCard himself, and it is phenomenal. It is perfect. I was reading that Keanu Reeves turned down this role, and boy, can I not imagine this working with Keanu Reeves' voice. I'm sure maybe if I saw it, I would feel differently, but this voice, this calm, collected, and the face of turmoil voice is just perfect for Dr. Manhattan. And that's the first thing I go to when I think of the performance of Billy Crudup is the voice. But everything else is fantastic as well. His mannerisms, again, just always a sense of calm. I think it is a great casting.
I agree. I think because he gets you see a bit of John before. Not a whole lot. There's a couple of scenes where you get to see him before, but he really does sell the difference. Like when he's John, it's human. There's standard, I'm about to die. I'm kind of scared about this. Like that was like he feels very normal. But then there's this, like you said, it's mostly a voice performance, but the detachment that he feels from like humanity, like all of that comes through in everything. Now, he is on set doing mocap, so there is work being done here. But it's still to differentiate just by voice as well as he does is, I think, tremendous. And I wouldn't go as far as to say it's two performances. I don't think there's enough of John really to kind of give it like a Superman level thing like Christopher Reeve, but he really does make sure that they're separate so that you're not just hearing John in this. They feel different, and he does a great job. Like you said, the voice of MasterCard himself.
It's one of my favorite roles in this movie after the rewatch. Like, especially because there is that extra level of tragedy there, because you see that the one segment that he is, the human, that he is just the physicist in the lab, showing him going to the carnival and this and that, and while that like tremendous organ music is playing under it. Oh, that was so high on my list of notes, was like the soundtrack. Good God, the soundtrack in this movie is so good. But yeah, you get just enough of him as this stoic, almost alien-like, omniscient figure at the beginning, and then you get the backstory. And that's why it cuts extra deep, because you see what he was, and you see the exact moment that he lost everything. And then everything, why he's so stoic going forward, makes so much more sense. Because I think at the beginning on a first watch, you would go, oh, this is just like a Superman figure. There's no explanation given for the first hour and change of this movie. You see him on the moon, you see him shaking hands with JFK, like all that stuff, but like they don't explain anything until you see the tragedy of his backstory. And his performance in it is excellent. Yes, stoic, but the dynamics between him as a human and him as this omniscient Dr. Manhattan figure is great. And the little subtleties, like when he's surrounded by the cameraman during the talk show, and I forget the line, but it's something along the lines of just like, I think it is just leave me alone. Yeah. And he just can't do it. And that's why he's basically on Mars for a majority of the rest of the movie. It's great. I really loved his performance here. Very underplayed, but perfectly.
It's that, and I think it's that underplay that makes those big moments feel more powerful. Like that moment when he is like overwhelmed and just vanishes because of how straight he's playing it. It makes that feel more powerful. Like at the end, like when he has the big moment with Laurie at the end, when he finally realizes that he does need to intervene in what's happening, like the build up to that, and like him just like he says, I was wrong. Like this omniscient being has admitted fault. And like all of that hits so much better because he establishes that baseline. And yeah, I wouldn't want to try to do it. So props to Billy Crudup for pulling it off.
It really is all about the subtleties because, like you said, it's so even keeled and calm that just the slightest inflection means so much more. My favorite instance of this is having that talk with Laurie on Mars, and he says, to prove that he cared, he says, when you left me, I left Earth. Like the way he emphasizes that, like, first of all, great line. I mean, he would write a killer emo album with poetry like that. But I love those little inflections. They're rare, but they mean so much more because of how even killed he is throughout the rest of the performance.
Just quick shout out, one of my favorite lines that I wrote on here was during that whole organ montage of showing his transformation, and it's that completely deadpan Dr. Manhattan line, and he just goes, I felt fear for the last time. as like
Yes.
the clock ticks to zero and like, you know, his whole being is eviscerated in that chamber. It's just like, God, this guy's been through so much, but he's so above it at this point. He's so all powerful that even a moment that huge doesn't really matter anymore.
Yep.
And his deadpan delivery of it is just like, oh, it almost gave me goosebumps. Like, great.
Now we have Malin Akerman as Laurie Jupiter, also known as Silk Spectre or Silk Spectre 2. I like that this movie has like legacy characters. Another great performance. I'm a broken record like that because this movie is perfectly cast, but I love her in this performance. She is ultimately a love interest, well, for multiple characters, but she gets to be more than that, and they explore her relationship with her mother and being a superhero in the first place. So I think we are definitely above. We're doing this character justice. We're going above just being that love interest for various male heroes, and I love that about the character. I think she plays it extremely well.
I agree.
Yeah.
She ends up being this she's this cross section of a lot of things for these characters. Like she's this big moment for John because John decides to leave his wife to be with Laurie instead. But then Laurie leaving John ends up being this big linchpin moment for him leaving the Earth, but then her being with Dan is this thing with both of them. They both get to grow from that experience. She gets to be with somebody who she feels a more physical attachment to and just even an emotional attachment to than she does with John. And Dan gets to kind of rediscover his confidence in the process. And then obviously the cross section she is of the OG Silk Spectre and the comedian in a more literal sense, which ends up being the precipice for John realizing he needs to intervene in what's happening. Like, she's probably, if you're talking from a story perspective, the second most important character after the comedian, honestly, because so many of the events of this movie have to run through the things that she experiences and lives through. So again, it's a lot going on with the character, but she's rising to the task.
I agree. I think a standout, again, I don't want to jump into scenes too much, but I really did love her role or her performance in that scene where her and Night Owl go out to the restaurant and they're just talking about old times, and I think it does such a great job on multiple levels because it not only shows like, you know, they have clear chemistry there, but at the same time it shows that both of these characters are a little bit flawed and a little bit like they only chuckled when they started talking about Rorschach throwing a guy down an elevator shaft. Like, clearly there's a little bit of twistedness in there, and it takes the rest of the movie to exactly figure out why. But yeah, I thought she was excellently casted.
That scene is so good. My note about it was that it just feels so genuine. This feels like old friends catching up, and they are struggling. You know, the whole arc is struggling to come to terms with, like, we've retired. We don't want to do that anymore, right? Right? We don't want to go back to that, right?
But there's something bubbling. They want to. Yeah, it's really finding that under the surface of that whole scene is great.
Matthew Good plays Adrian Veidt, also known as Ozymandias. I think I've pronounced it a few different ways in the episode already, but he's that guy. You know him. This performance took me the longest to warm up to, I think. I think most of these people, especially if you've read the book, you see him as the character, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. I can't imagine anyone else. This one, it took me the longest to warm up to, but I think there's still a lot going on here that I like. Specifically, I was reading that whenever in the movie, when he's speaking publicly, he uses an American accent. But privately, when there's not press around, he uses his natural German accent, the character's natural accent, which is genius and something that I did not notice watching the movie. As many times I've seen this movie, I've never noticed that. But that is such a cool character detail that makes so much sense for this character. And I think what Matthew excels at the most with this character is believing that he is the smartest man on Earth, or at least he believes he is the smartest man on Earth. His passive-aggressive condescending way is spot on.
Yeah.
No, I agree. The arrogance is what comes through the most.
That's
like
a better word
it's
than my word salad just now. Thank you.
right. It's. I remember that being something people kind of were a little critical about because he comes off self-righteous. So the turn didn't seem like a surprise, but at the same time, even without that, the character is an arrogant guy. That's what he is. He's like you said, he sits in this place where he believes, like, you know, this whole movie is about his plan that he is believed to be the most foolproof thing in the world. He believes this will work, and ultimately, that what he's doing is what is going to save the Earth. And so that arrogance is one of the most important parts, and he definitely, that exudes from him. Like, anytime you look at this character, you're like, yeah, this guy thinks he's better than literally everybody in this room.
Yeah. He drank his own Kool-Aid. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
he's believing the hype as much as anyone else. And I do agree, though. But maybe, you know, slightly weaker performance than the rest, only because there is that twist at the end. So you need to build to it. He can't just be this, like, Mr. Burns, you know, crunching
Right.
his fingers at the beginning kind of villain.
Excellent.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, very, very subtle in all the most arrogant ways. The photo shoot mid-interview,
Yes.
really...
With Annie Leibovitz, no less.
Is that who that was?
That's who it's implied
Or
to
that-
be.
okay.
Yeah, I mean the celebrity lookalikes throughout this movie are near constant. I wrote down a handful of them. I'll go through later, but then I read like a list of them. There's like no joke, 30 plus celebrities like in the background and stuff of
that's
these
great.
scenes. But yeah, that photographer is implied to be Annie Leibovitz taking his picture. Yeah, mid interview.
Yeah, just an excellent job. And once he kind of takes the chains off and into that final scene in the Arctic or wherever that was, A+. Like,
Oh yeah,
he
choose the
crushes it.
scenery. Like he.
Oh yeah.
Like all the monologues, it's the Antarctic, not the Arctic, by the way.
Oh.
Wrong side of the planet.
Ah.
But
Yeah,
he-
Bob. Hang on, let me change my notes real quick.
But no, that scene in particular, like when he does the twist, like the big moment that this comic is mostly known for, which is that the whole race is who is doing this, why are they doing it, we have to stop them. And, you know, we don't have to jump into the whole scene, but just the way he's chewing the scenery there and delivers those lines, he's like, it's like you can tell the guy's been waiting for it because he just like, he's so, like at that moment, you're like, wow, I hate you. Like, I really want something bad to happen to you. But,
and man, that hair, that perfectly like cone brush, blonde,
well
like,
coiffed.
you can picture him like in a polo and short khaki shorts and a pair of Toms on a yacht, right? Like that level of.
Oh yeah,
100%.
like this is that guy you
Guppy
knew in
douche.
college or that guy you knew in high school, and you just hated it. Like
Yeah.
even if you didn't have a good reason for it, you just knew. Like it's
I think one reason that a lot of people put him like a tier below some of the other cast is we don't get that backstory montage that we do for most of these characters. So there's just a little bit less for us to kind of sink our teeth into or feel some empathy for him because we kind of only see the surface level stuff and then the sinister stuff, but not really how he came to be. So it's not all on him, but ultimately I think he does the best with the material he is given.
Mhm.
We also have Carla Gugino as Sally Jupiter, the original Silk Spectre, and she actually gets to play this character in two different eras. We get to see her in flashbacks as a young superhero of the time and as Laurie's mother, aged up a bit with the help of makeup. So not quite two distinct performances. It's the same character, but she gets to show a little bit of range with being asked to do different things with the character.
yeah, she gets to play like kind of the two different sides, really, not necessarily two different performances, but two different. Like you see her when she's young and kind of all about being a superhero, and you get to witness that kind of transformation into what she is, which is just almost just pure nostalgia for the past almost. That's kind of where she ends up. And you get the little bit of the in-between where she's like, I was a hero. And like you can tell that like not being a hero is something that, she's that person that's kind of stuck in remembering the good old days. No matter how bad they actually were, the memory turns it into something positive. and she plays that to a T. And I think she does a great job with it. And yeah,
And she loves her margaritas.
She
Who
loves
wouldn't?
her margaritas at 2
2 in the
p.m.
afternoon. I was waiting for her to say like it's 9:30 or something. Like,
Yeah, 2:00. That's totally reasonable. That's happy hour where I'm at.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can have a margarita with lunch. I don't think that's insane, but like, I guess the number of margaritas is the bigger question there.
Yeah. I do
Sure.
love this. There's a very subtle thing. Again, I hate to break the order of this, but right toward the end, during the whole denouement, and she's walking away after her and Laurie have a conversation, and there's a very subtle thing. Night Owl walks in and she goes, "Oh, excuse me, I need to powder, or I need to fresh myself up." And she walks away, and she's like blurry out of focus in the background, but she's in front of the window, so you see her silhouette. And she chugs her entire drink, takes a breath, and then walks off stage. And it's like, good on you. I know that
So
was in the
good.
script, but it felt like it wasn't. And those are always my favorite moments. She was just a great character foil for Laurie. Like,
Yes.
she's the one who is so nostalgic about the past, even if it's awful,
Right.
in the way that Laurie is like trying to find herself again. It's a very interesting dynamic. She does a great job with it.
We could spend a lot of time on this cast. It's a very deep cast, a lot of minor parts. There's a couple more I want to hit here. Stephen McHattie plays Hollis Mason, the original Night Owl. Now, in the theatrical cut, he essentially has one scene, and it's very good. He gets to play old man telling his stories about the good old days, and he plays it so well. There's a cadence to tell a story like that, and he absolutely nails it. The way he's, old men give like unnecessary details. Like, a dollar bill. He was a tall man. Right? Like this, like, does that matter to the story? But like, it's like as he's remembering it, he's telling the story. So you get all these like unnecessary details in this rambling way, and it's so charming. I love his scene with Patrick Wilson.
Yeah, it's a really good one because you can feel also, like you said, you get that kinship between them, but you also see how much Dan is kind of not too far removed from that. Like, because that's kind of where Hollis is in his life, is like, he runs this auto shop, but like, it's all he's another guy that it's almost all nostalgia. Like, it's remembering, it's almost like they can't move on. Again, almost like that might be a theme of this book. But it's such a great performance. And I think it's slightly above McHattie's performance as the narrator of Basketball. But it's definitely.
Well, hold on now. I don't know.
I don't want to. Didn't mean to round you guys up for a hot take there, but otherwise, yeah, he is a character that is not portrayed the same when he's young and old. They cast somebody else to play him when he's younger, but I think McHattie as the older version was a fantastic choice, because in this case, the older version is the one who kind of does have the scene. All the younger scenes are really they're kind of throwaway. I don't think he really even says much of anything in the flashbacks. Right. But yeah, great performance. He, like I said, in the theatrical, it really is just the one scene. It gets more in the other versions, but
that's
in
actually
this
what
one,
I was wondering.
So, Bob, you haven't seen the extended version, right?
No,
I don't want to.
I knew there was, but yeah,
I don't want to spoil it for you, but the extra scene that he gets in the extended version might be my favorite scene of the extended version.
Whoa.
It is.
it's so
It
well
is
done.
incredible. It's very
It
good.
is so, like, we'll talk about scenes later, but yeah, it's very well done.
that's great. Because he was a character that he shows up so early, and I was like, oh, this is so nice and charming. Like, he's someone who's in a movie that's filled with characters that are all have a ton of flaws that are really on the surface. He just seemed like a nice. And again, maybe the extended version is going to completely discredit it, but he just seemed like a nice guy who was totally happy in his retirement, who just had all these old stories and loved telling it to, the youth, aka Night Owl too.
Yeah.
And who was someone I was looking forward to popping back up again. And I genuinely couldn't remember on this rewatch if he did. But in the theatrical version, he does not.
Yeah, I don't want to just keep teasing it, but he pops up. It won't shatter your image of him.
Okay.
Don't worry.
No, definitely.
One of my favorite scenes of the movie. I love that he is like a mechanic now, or he runs an auto shop.
Yeah.
Like, he's genuinely moved on to a new job, and he's nostalgic and he tells his stories. But I genuinely feel like this guy actually found a second life. He wrote his book that you see like in the background a lot, the Under the Hood, about his, journeys as a superhero. But I think he's one that more or less has a happy story after being a superhero.
Yeah. And there was a great little, I don't know, Easter egg. Maybe it's a little too on the nose to even be an Easter egg, but outside of his shop, his mechanic shop, was a little sign that I wrote a note that just said, "Obsolete models a specialty." And I was just like, that's a very cute, like, on the nose thing here. Like, not every superhero has a spot in this world anymore. So that's a very cute sign to put outside of a shop.
The last casting I want to bring up is Matt Frewer as the villain Moloch, who gets a couple scenes, and he is so good in those scenes, specifically delivering his line about cancer. Yeah, the kind that you get better from? That ain't the kind that I got. It is so good. And he's a villain that we know is a villain, but we never see him doing awful things. So immediately, it's very easy to have empathy for this guy. Especially as Rorschach is just brutally breaking his arm. Totally unnecessary. He's like a frail 80-year-old man. But I really like his two scenes. I guess it's one scene, and then there's a flashback during the same scene. So essentially one scene in this movie is memorable, very memorable because of his performance.
Yeah, I agree. And that's actually one of the scenes with Rorschach where I was kind of like, oh, like, maybe you're not my favorite character. Like, I don't like, it was like, but that nuance he's got, and that scene with the comedian, like, it's a very symbolic scene, because it shows, like you said, we mentioned earlier with the comedian, like, at this stage, and it's like he has no friends, he has nobody, like, this thing he's figured out, he can't actually talk to anybody about it because he doesn't have anybody to talk about it. So he literally goes to one of his arch enemies. But there's some nuance here that I like, but I agree. It's a limited role. He does play a part. Obviously, he's part of one of Ozymandias's one of the kind of splinters of his plan to really kind of discredit John on the Earth is used on Moloch. He's one of the people that they involve in that, and so it's
making the story that much more tragic.
Right,
that he was a pawn in the game.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump into some scenes, fellas. I know we've already talked about a few because we're so excited to jump into it. There's so many good scenes in this movie. We're going to cover them, but of course, we're starting at the high point with the best scene of the movie, or at the very least, our favorite scene. So, Andrew, we'll start with you. When is this movie firing on all cylinders, and what is your favorite scene of Watchmen?
I think I'm going to go with the obvious one here, and...
You say that. I'm curious if it is obvious.
Well, I have a couple of scenes. Like, this is actually kind of difficult for me to parse out, because there are a lot of really effective scenes in this film that are telling the story from the comic in a very accurate way. But I think I got to go with the jailbreak sequence. I think because at that moment, Laurie and Dan have kind of found their footing, and their confidence is back as characters. And this is kind of when the inmates try to turn on Rorschach and pay him back for all the things he's done to them. And obviously that goes terribly wrong. And like, there's a very kind of haunting, one of the last images of this scene is when Rorschach tells Dan and Laurie's like, have to use the bathroom. And he like goes into the bathroom and the door is swinging back and forth. And Danny Woodburn, who plays this kind of prison guy, so big guy,
mob boss,
big figure,
yeah. Which, if you know who Danny Woodburn is, you see the irony there. But
he's a little person.
Yes. But like, it's so he's walking in, and like you see Rorschach walking towards him while the door is kind of going back and forth, and so you're getting these kind of broken images and just very, very good visual storytelling, which is one of the things that Zack Snyder and his various cinematographers were very good at with this movie, was kind of taking these images, and especially from the page in some instances, and translating them to screen. But
now, we don't see exactly what he does to Danny's character in there. I've always imagined he gives him like the ultimate swirly. Is that what you guys imagine too? He just shoves his head down the toilet? Because eventually, like, the water pours out, but the water's red because it's like blood. So the toilet's got to be involved somewhere, right? That's in my head canon. He shoves him into a toilet.
That's never been my assumption. I always assumed he broke his head over a sink or something.
Okay.
But because that seems what Rorschach does. But the notion of Rorschach just being just giving somebody a swirly, just,
Holding him by the sneakers. Just
yeah, just gotcha. But yeah, otherwise, in this scene too, you get Dan and Lori kind of at their full capacity now. The previous scene, the fire rescue, is also very good, especially for those two characters. But in this moment, they're back. The nostalgia is gone. The kind of wistful nature of looking back is gone, and they just are these people again. They are Night Owl and Silk Spectre, and seeing kind of the fulfillment of Dan's arc here is something else that just liking that character is very satisfying. To kind of, this is now the guy who knows who he is, knows where he sits, and whether it's allowed or not, he's Night Owl, and that's what he needs to do, for better or worse. And all of those pieces together here, I just like it a lot. Obviously, you get Rorschach beating up a lot of people here, if you're into that sort of thing.
And tons of quips, tons of puns.
Tons of puns. But yeah, it's extremely, it's very well done. It's towards the end. There's only a couple of scenes in the movie after this. And I was watching it, and I mean, the theatrical is what, 2:45 ish,
2:40,
and I think you're well past 2 hours before this scene happens. And I was just wow, this happens so much later than I thought. But then I was oh, but what happens after this? Not a whole lot happens after it either, because obviously this film does not have the kind of the classic climax you might think it does. But yeah, I love this scene. Obviously, for Rorschach fans, it's a huge showcase of that character. The whole prison sequence for Rorschach is like I said, another thing that you hear people talk about a lot. But for what this scene means for Dan and Lori as well, which I think gets a little lost, is also part of why I think it sits so high for me. So yeah, great set piece here.
100% agree. I love it. Not my personal favorite, but it's a fantastic scene. And yeah, it shows. I think they even have a little moment with Dan and Lori where they're walking through the hallways, and a couple of the prisoners get eyes on them, and they have this little smirk on their face, yeah, we didn't plan on knocking any of you out, but we're going to.
Yeah,
and a lot of you. It's
I love
fun.
that they have this big dramatic fight, essentially through one hallway is what we see. Them just taking out people left and right. They're there to spring Rorschach, to get him out. But when they see him, Rorschach is casually just strolling. He's got his mask on already. They're oh, hey, you want to go? We got a ride.
Yeah.
He's saying himself. And Danny Woodburn is the last. I had him written down for the casting, but I knew it would come up here. His scene when he first approaches Rorschach, and there's a prison riot going on, and their whole goal is to get into his cell and kill Rorschach. He gives the best pro wrestler promo as he is threatening him at the cell. He's "There's no less than 50 guys that you put away, and this place is gonna explode." It's it's the way he hits that word so well. It's I'd watch that pay-per-view.
This dude snorted a bunch of cocaine before he did this scene.
This is 80s Ultimate Warrior for sure.
Yeah.
He gets it.
Dig it. Just turned into Macho Man Randy Savage.
Whilst with a cigar in his mouth and the two cronies on each side. Beautiful.
Well, Bob, you said this wasn't your favorite scene of the movie, so what is your favorite scene in Watchmen?
This is a tough one. I have two that are so neck and neck.
You have to pick one, and the other one is deleted from the movie forever.
No!
You'll never get to watch it.
Never
Again.
mention it.
I'm sorry, Snyder.
It's the reverse Snyder cut. It's the Bob Buel cut. It gets shorter.
The Buell cut, 6 minutes shorter. I love it. It's almost silly to choose it because there's no dialogue, but it's
oh my god, I know what you're gonna say.
It's the opening Bob Dylan montage.
Right. Yes.
It's so freaking good. That's why I almost hesitate to do it because it's all in slow-mo. There's very little acting technically. There's no dialogue whatsoever. But it is so the perfect mood setter for what you're about to watch. Because at this point, the only thing you've seen is the comedian get thrown out a window and a button get blood on it, and that's it. And then this starts. So, like, if you know nothing about the context and nothing about these characters, this montage tells you basically everything you need to know to roll into this movie within a 4.5 minute sequence, done to a fantastic Bob Dylan song. I love Bob Dylan, and this is such a great one to choose. And so it fits the theme so perfectly. Times they are a changin'. As it just shows all the slight historical changes that this movie is setting up for. In no particular order, Nixon in his third term, the famous, VJ day of the sailor dipping the woman in Times Square, maybe?
The ticker tape parade.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that little tidbit, yeah.
And I love how it shows the first photograph of them from 1940, I believe, when they were not even the Watchmen, they were the Minutemen. And it's basically, classic Silver Era comic book caricatures, basically. These are like the Kirkland brand of all the superheroes that we actually got in the real world. So it's like, oh, I know the, equivalents of all of these. And then the movie does such a great twist on its head of, well, here's the tragic downfall of every one of those characters if they were to exist in a real world dark scenario. Bruce Wayne as Batman probably wouldn't just be happy forever and rich and fine forever. Yeah, maybe he would just get his cape stuck in a turnstile somewhere and get mowed down by thugs. Maybe or who was it? The Human Fly, or it's not the Human Fly.
Mothman goes
committed,
who just is straight up dragged away to some sort of mental health facility or something like that in the 50s. And it's just like, yeah, you look at your favorite superhero character in real life, I say, that we read about in real life or watch in real life. And you look back on it, it's like, yeah, they probably would have institutionalized at least some of these people if they were real. It's taking the rose-colored glasses off and, seeing this kind of really dark world that they're setting up in perfect effect, showing comedian as the person from the grassy knoll to kill JFK. Like, what a bonkers starting point for that character. And yeah, seeing little kid Rorschach, even though you don't even know that's who it is at the beginning. Like, they don't even show Rorschach's face until hour 40 into the movie when he goes to jail. So like, you have
hour 40. Yeah, this is a very long movie.
Yeah,
40 hours in.
40. It just does such a great job of setting the tone. That's the best way I can put it. Going forward into this film. Again, the one photograph into the other photograph in the 80s, and all these dark, horrible things happening in between. It shows that this group is not the Justice League. This group is not idyllic in any way, shape, or form. This is a group of flawed people who have gone through some horrible things in their time, but are still ostensibly a group. And that's where the movie picks up. And I love it. I love it so much.
If you were to ask me what's the best opening credits of all time, Watchmen is the first thing that comes to mind. Yeah. And I mean, we covered X-Men Origins Wolverine, which also has extremely good opening credits. And on that episode, I was like, it's like 1A and 1B. Like, that one's also really good. But Watchmen is always my first pick because, I mean, you get the Bob Dylan song, which it's like a 3-minute song. So, like, it loops, but you don't even care. Like, verses come up multiple times because they got to make it stretch the whole thing. But it works flawlessly. And I think, really, this opening montage is playing into Zack Snyder's strengths, which he is a very specific type of director with a very specific style that over the course of his entire career, people have any opinions about when it works and when it doesn't. But I think, again, this opening montage is playing into the strength. The fact that everything is slow motion, but we're seeing such small snippets that it kind of has to be. And that just kind of is what makes sense to tell give us that much information in that short of time is so well done.
Yeah.
And it establishes the world that we're in, because it's kind of, I mean, you could say that this is like superheroes in the real world, but it's not like Kick-Ass, which I think is kind of what that is going for. Like, you know, these guys get their ribs broken and everything, because that's how real world is. It's more like superheroes in a alternate version of the real world, because we still have, like, you know, Dr. Manhattan's not very relatable for the real world, and we still have like events, but they don't play out the way that we know that they played out. I mean, you know, from Vietnam to some of the famous pictures that we see a reference there. I love I guess you could say hippies pitting the flower into the rifle, but when it zooms in, the rifle goes off. And it's setting up that it's just, you know, this parallel order of events that have been changed, that have these superheroes. And Dollar Bill getting his cape stuck in the revolving door is so good. I don't think they get into it in the movie, but his character's whole thing is that he was like corporately sponsored, and he's like not really a superhero. He's like, a corporation sponsored him to advertise for their bank, I guess. And it makes sense that he'd be so clumsy that his cape would get stuck in a revolving door. Plus, you know, capes not very effective. Edna's got a whole speech about it in Incredibles. Like, it's not not the way you want to go designing your costume. But yeah, I mean, like I said, possibly my favorite opening credits of all time. I didn't pick it as my favorite pick, but I'm glad you did. That makes me feel less guilty about not picking it, but it's a wonderful pick.
Glad I could help.
Best scene in the movie.
Yeah.
It really is. It's, well, 'cause as you both touched on, this is not the real world. We get differences, we get changes. And obviously the history that it's showing is part of what Watchmen does, which is deconstruct the superhero myth. So with things like Dollar Bill, like, what's the last thing you would expect to happen to a comic book superhero? He gets his cape stuck in a door and he gets shot. Like, that's the last thing you're going to expect of him. All the way to the ending with them showing up to stop Adrian, and nope, you don't get to stop me because I already did it because I'm not dumb.
Yeah.
It's all of these things that are designed to kind of not necessarily just twist for the sake of twisting, but to build this story where we kind of take apart what being a superhero is. And this opening credits really establishes that world. And it's so well done. And this is another one that I hear people, like Chris said, if somebody said this was their favorite opening credits sequence of all time, you wouldn't think that was weird, because it's so well done and gets what it's trying to do across so well. So yeah, great scene.
Just super, super effective storytelling, as well as the apartment scene before this, which we're going to talk about. But first, talk about my favorite scene in the movie. Yeah. And what I have gone with is, Andrew, did you say there was an obvious pick for best scene?
Maybe, probably, yeah.
Oh, well, I was curious what scene you were thinking of when you said
thought
that.
It was the jailbreak scene.
You thought that's the obviously best?
Like, all the Rorschach scenes get highlighted. Maybe it's the scene where he's, you know, we'll talk about it in a minute, but
honestly, I'm loving that we're all having different picks, though, because it shows that there's just a lot to dig into. This very dense, very long movie. What I'm going with is what I think is the most... we're going to argue about what the obvious choice is. I think I'm going to touch on the most iconic scene of the movie, which is Dr. Manhattan's flashback and his origin story, as it were.
That was my number 2.
He's
excellent.
Essentially sitting on Mars, and he's looking at the photograph, and we kind of, I guess it's implied that this is kind of how he experiences time. It's all somewhat simultaneous, because he just seamlessly jumps from him being his past as a regular human to him being Dr. Manhattan and interfering in people's lives. But it's so well done. The score is everything. This montage doesn't work without that score that's kind of like sci-fi, but also like introspective, and is perfect for just sucking you in. Like, even if you were casually watching this movie, you had it on the background, when this scene starts, you're sitting on the couch and you're watching until it's over. Like, it pulls you in, and it's just super, super effective storytelling, as so much of this movie is. And I love it, especially the scenes where you see him as a human. And you touched on it earlier, Bob, whenever he is about to get killed, visually we see human John freaking out, but we also hear his voice say, "I experienced fear for the last time." And the juxtaposition for his current presence and being a state of mind to how he was as a human is chef's kiss, beautiful stuff. Perfect. I think this little segment is is perfect. Along with those opening credits are perfect as well. This is also a perfect segment of this movie. And this montage exists in the book. I don't want to harp too much about, differences in the book or anything, but it's also an effective way to kind of condense a lot of storytelling. The book is very dense, and as is the movie, but they still had to sort of condense a few things, and the opening montage did that. And this is another way to just feed you so much information in such an interesting and varied way that my favorite scene in the movie.
The soundtrack here, I actually want to talk about this soundtrack for a second, because it is not by Tyler Bate, who does the rest of this film soundtrack. This sequence is taken from a movie called Koyaanisqatsi, which is a experimental film by Godfrey Reggio. And this score by Philip Glass, who does the score here. That intro to that movie is what that music is. So it is taken from literally a completely different movie, yet lines up perfectly. Now, the choice of using it, I think, is definitely an instance where you could argue that there's a direct line, because Koyaanisqatsi is a non-narrative film. So it's literally like an hour, or it's like 86 minutes of like unscripted sequences that the director shot and kind of turned into this original version of it, and then eventually it kind of grow a little bit more. But it's a lot of slow motion, it's a lot of time lapse, and the subtitle of the movie is literally Life Out of Balance. So when you take all of those things together, I think it lines up perfectly with using it in this sequence, which is showing John's life non-narratively, like you're seeing these things out of order, his life out of balance to a degree, and I think it's just a very effective use of that soundtrack. It's been used a lot of times because arguably that soundtrack is more liked than the movie itself. The movie is.
I was going to say, you're describing it, and that sounds like horrible. I would not want to sit through that.
It's
but
the first
the
film
score is
in
undeniable.
it's the first film in the Qatsi trilogy, or the Qatsi trilogy, which I think is on the Criterion Collection. So if you ever really want to be confused for a while, go to town. You could
Sounds
you
like
could
the
do a lot
ultimate
worse.
film snob movie.
You're more correct than not correct. but I think the usage of that, and and it's Philip Glass, who is one of the more underrated film composers out there. People don't talk about Philip Glass a lot, but when he does typically do something, it tends to be very memorable. But it's a great usage of that, and I think the themes of the movie it's from line up with the idea of what John experiences as life at that point, experiencing life consecutively, not linearly.
Yeah. Even as he's describing it, he goes, "It is, October 6th, 1950." He doesn't say it was. Everything just, it is.
It is.
Yeah.
Great catch. People don't, I don't think people realize that John doesn't speak of things in the past. He speaks of everything in the present.
Yep. Everything is always happening currently. He has that scene with Laurie where he's making what ends up being the bomb in the background for Ozymandias, and they have a quick he mentions it offhandedly there, where it's like, I wish you could experience time like I do. And yeah.
And he gives her the opportunity to do so later in the movie.
Yeah, very true.
On Mars.
But to go back to your chosen scene, oh my gosh, that was my second favorite that I was so close to choosing.
So it gets to survive in the final cut of the film.
The Buel cut makes it.
Yeah. Your 1 and 2 is my 2 and 1.
Okay.
Or vice versa. I mean, they were both like, or 1A, 1B, you could say.
And I do want to send a quick shout out to Rob LaBelle, who played Wally Weaver. In that scene, he only really shows up in that scene, and I did catch him. He's in the opening montage behind Dr. Manhattan at the JFK when he's shaking his hand. Wally's in the background there, okay. Which would make sense, they're physicists together. But he has a very small part in this movie. But when sorry, I'm forgetting Dr. Manhattan's real name. John. When John is trapped in that chamber and the door closes, and he at first he's like, get me out of here, guys. Like, I'm freaking out, but I'm kind of laughing through it. And Wally,
play cool.
yeah, played it cool. And Wally walks by and sees the timer and sees the door, and his face just like drains of all color, of all emotion. He just is the most he's like stabbed through the heart in that moment, and he plays it so well for a guy who's only in two scenes in that movie. Right. What an exceptional way of like, I'm sorry, I can't, there's nothing we can do here, and now he just needs to watch his friend get eviscerated with energy. It's what was the girlfriend's name even? I'm blanking on
Janie.
Janie. Janie runs in, sees him stuck in there again, has this absolute tragic face on, but can't even stand it, and runs out of the room like, and all this amazing facial expressions of emotion are completely heightened with the fact that the narration over it is the most stoic baseline narration from Dr. Manhattan from after he's already existed. Or like when he tells the story of like 2 weeks later they found a skeletal system in the hallway, but it only appeared for 2 seconds, which would, if anyone else was telling the story, would be like, can you freaking believe this? But for Dr. Manhattan, it's just whatever. It is. Just is.
It is.
Yeah, it's so good. My favorite line of the movie comes during this scene. I used it in the intro, but we repeat, the Superman exists and he is American, because that is exactly what America would do if this happened. Yeah. They're like, he's ours, he's
in
mine.
The political climate of the time.
Yeah.
Like, we would
be
Cold War.
Very clear to be like, this guy here, he's with us. Like,
yeah, red, white, and blue, baby. Yeah, it's
especially
mostly blue, but he's with us.
And I think, y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's Wally that mentions that line later, because he says, I was misquoted. I didn't say Superman exists, I said God exists. And it's a very dramatic line, because it goes on to say, like, if you have extreme reaction to that, it only means that you're sane. I'm paraphrasing, but it's he's a little bit aged up there. I think it's the one time you see him like aged up a little bit, kind of reflecting back on the accident and what happened. And very good, very memorable performance for a guy that only has a couple of scenes in the movie. So Good pull there, Bob. Speaking of memes inspired by this movie, I am tired of Earth, these people. I am tired of being caught in the tangle of their lives. Anytime I'm having just the most minor of a bad day, I stub my toe, I think to myself, I am tired of being caught in the tangle of their lives.
Love it.
It is good. I love the idea of Dr. Manhattan assembling himself, and he doesn't assemble himself as Billy Crudup. He assembles himself as like the ideal Greek body, and I don't know what that says about his character or whatnot, but like, I guess, if I got to kind of, pick my body, I would just, max out all the sliders on the create a character menu, right?
10 out of 10, guys.
Oh, it's great. Even the subtle, and he has a specific line about it when he inscribes the little molecular symbol on his forehead. And he has the line, like, they called me Dr. Manhattan as a way to, I think he says, like, they wanted to make me propaganda or something along those lines, is the line in the movie, which is also so good, because it's like, of course he wouldn't come up with that name for himself, like, and he wouldn't have this just, perfect Superman symbol on his forehead, basically, like, he did that because the government was like, we want to strike fear into any other country into knowing we have you on our side. And maybe the graphic novel goes into deeper explanation of that, but to me, those two lines were all I needed to get the wide swath of what they're going for there. And it's just another very subtle, realistic approach to how a character like this, if they existed in the Cold War, how they would probably be handled.
I know he says of the symbol, you can tell me it's in theatrical cut or not. I don't remember them saying it, but he says, if I'm going to have a symbol, it's going to be of something that I respect. And he comes up with that symbol of the, I think it's a nucleus. I think it's
like hydrogen,
an atom.
like an atom,
Something?
electron going around.
I don't think
it.
he says that in the theatrical.
I don't believe so.
Yeah, I don't think
you just
so.
see him doing it.
Yeah.
And he mentions that, like, obviously the Manhattan was supposed to be an allusion to, like, the Manhattan Project, which was, you know, the development of nuclear weapons. And
Which
so,
is
like,
his favorite Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Because he exists in all times, including the time where that was made.
That is the most underrated of the Turtles games. It's very good. It gets overshadowed by Turtles in Time, but Manhattan Project, check it out. A little promo
Turtles
for a
in Time
30-year-old
is
game.
pretty great, though.
Yeah. It's got that alliteration, too.
I like I do like that sequence with John kind of... It's like you said, like, and it's even just, like, if somebody this powerful existed, who literally experienced the world this way, yeah, he's going to stop caring about Earth pretty quickly when he realizes that there's so much more going on. And that's, like, obviously when Laurie leaves him, he's like, all right, I got nothing left for Earth. Let's go to Mars. Like, it's very... Yeah, obviously, again, that's just playing into the story of Watchmen, the idea that, you know, if somebody was this powerful, he probably would move beyond the Earth because the Earth is going to get boring eventually. And, yeah, again, Crudup, all of this just works so well.
Yeah.
I love the visual storytelling, and it's present in the theatrical, but expanded on in other versions of the story, that the more detached he comes from humanity, the less clothes he wears. Because he starts off with, like, basically a bodysuit, and then pants, and then shorts, and then a Speedo, because he's like, my thighs make you uncomfortable, I don't care. And then eventually, naked. He's just naked. He's like, I'm not going to change anything to make you feel comfortable.
Yeah.
It's my
Why would I
make you
care?
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I don't give a shit. Yeah. I love, like, the parallel, because it's not pointed out. It's not exactly subtle either, but it's just, again, nice visual storytelling. And what other story can you say that a character getting more and more naked, like, it means anything or tells you about the character? It's pretty cool.
Yeah. There's another very small, like, nugget of a scene was when when Dr. Manhattan warps Laurie to Mars for the first time, and she immediately can't breathe, and he just goes, oh, and, like, taps her on the shoulder and just creates oxygen or whatever. And he has a very subtle line there where he's just like, I forgot that you even need that. And it says so much about him in that moment where he's just like, oh, of course, you and your humans are so
dependent on the atmosphere.
Yeah, you're so dependent on so much other stuff. Fine, I'll toss you the ball. Here's your precious oxygen that you need. But and again, it could have been played off for a joke. It could have been played off for anything. But, like, I think in that moment, it says so much about him as a character, because he's just like, humans are so in his rearview mirror at that point. It doesn't matter. To the point where he warped her there and forgot that oxygen doesn't exist on Mars. Like, brilliant.
To be honest with you, Bob, it took me out of the movie because I've seen Total Recall. If you are on Mars, your head is supposed to swell up and your eyes bulge out of your skull. That's
is 85.
the science.
Well, no, John exists in all time, so he doesn't have that excuse. I was like, I don't think Total Recall was out in 85.
Do not make excuses for him, Andrew.
But no. John is. He is in all times, which means he exists in the time when Total Recall is made.
Yeah. So, effective storytelling. There's so many examples of it in this movie. Even that very first scene where the comedian is getting killed. The first thing we see is him flipping through the channels. And man, they make every opportunity to set the stage with that. So you see Nixon as president. So you might assume the timeline, but very smartly he flips to MTV, like classic MTV. So we know it's the 80s, and we start kind of putting stuff together, and it gets reinforced throughout the movie. But as he flips through it, then you've got the commercial for the Vite product, I think, that plays the song that plays during his getting murdered. But it's just super effective. I think you see the Doomsday Clock introduced there as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, he comes in. We get our first action scene. And did you catch this? His apartment number.
I wrote it down. Yep.
is
300.
Of course, a reference to
obviously
the year 300.
The year 300.
Yes.
Zack
So
Snyder's
really confuse us about what
biblical
year. Yes. That was a fun little nod.
Yeah, I caught that too. I was like, Click the pen. That's a good one. Never saw that.
My
before.
note is apartment 300. Hey.
Hey. No, I do like that scene a lot. I like that intro sequence. I think Jeffrey Dean, I like you said, it's actually effective at, like, again, building out more of this world. Like, we talk about how the intro credits do that, but this too, there's a lot of just brief things here, but again, we establish just the baseline of the present.
Yeah.
Obviously, the montage gets us to the present, but this establishes a lot of the baselines of what that present is. And just, yeah, very effective.
Yeah. Even comedian as a person, you don't get a lot of it. But I did have a note that said, a Hustler magazine with a gun on top of it. Is there a better way to describe the comedian in one shot? You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
so perfectly summed up a character in half a second of a camera shot. Like, well done.
So good. And he gets his one line, which isn't even like spoken to anybody, but it's as soon as the door gets broken, he says, just a matter of time, I suppose.
Yep.
Like, this is how I knew it would end. Like, he doesn't know who it is, why he's getting killed, but this is the only way his character story ends after the stuff that he did throughout his life. And then also in his apartment, it comes later when Rorschach breaks in, we see his bedroom. He has a picture of Sally, like, framed on his nightstand,
Yeah.
which is nice. And still, carried a flame for her all those years.
And the most obvious button in his closet.
Yeah.
I loved how obvious that was. Like, Rorschach was like, what could be the puzzle here? And then he just moved one coat an inch to the side and was like, bingo.
Yeah, he's like
Worst
feeling all around, like, on
detectives.
top for, like, a button or a switch or something, and then he finally just, like, moves the suit and he's side, and I'm just like, could it be that easy?
Yes,
yes,
it
it
is.
could.
Worst detectives ever. They've scoured the place already. They see a picture of him with the president, like, he must have been important. But the big red button in his closet, like, it could have had like a neon sign, like an arrow.
Yeah.
Don't press. No secrets back here.
Please disperse. There's nothing to see here.
Something confusing.
Oh,
We've talked a few times on this show about how we're in a comic book movie and then like another comic book movie's universe comes up. Like there's
Mhm.
Superman references and Venom.
Batman.
In the opening,
Yeah.
the Batman comic book in the opening montage. There's the cover to Batman 1 is like plastered over a brick wall. So Batman exists in this universe. The character of Batman, he's also a comic book. Is that based on a real person? Or do superheroes exist in comic books and all of the caped heroes that we see in the movie are inspired by comic books? Or is it a fun Easter egg we're not supposed to read into it? I don't know.
What adds the extra layer to it was like that opening shot of, I believe it's Night Owl 1, if maybe I'm totally wrong,
I think so.
is like the Batman origin story. They're outside of Gotham Theater. It's
Right.
listed on the wall. There's two rich parents and a son in the background, and there's Joe Chill, like the guy who killed Batman's parents, being punched by Night Owl. Basically saying, like, Batman's origin story doesn't happen here. But
Oh, you're putting... I did not put all that together. That is
yeah.
fantastic. Yeah.
But what
I don't really like Batman. I don't know much about the
who?
character.
That was Batman with a
He dresses as a bat. Hey, Bob, I have a question for
Yeah.
you. I'm totally derailing you. Yes or no?
Yes.
Does Batman dress up as a bat?
This is an interesting question. He's got the little cowl and he's got the cape, so I'm gonna say, yeah, at least inspired by a bat.
Whoa,
Oh.
we gotta draw a
inspired
hard.
by a bat is
we
not
gotta
the
draw
same
a
as
hard
dressed as a
line.
bat.
Because Aquaman teases him about this in Justice League. He's like, you do it dressed as a bat, and Andrew very vehemently was like, he doesn't dress as a bat. He uses bat
Iconography.
symbology. Yeah, and I'm like, he's got wings and
If
ears.
he didn't have
If
the
you
little
see him-
ears, I could be with you. But the
Again,
cowl's
we're
got
using
the-
iconography. Show me a picture of a bat, and then show me Batman, and tell me Batman's dressed as a
I've got
bat.
Batman. I've had two separate Adam West 66 Batman movie poster and
Yeah, now where is your
Japanese
picture of a bat?
Batman poster.
Where is your picture
So,
of a
would he
bat?
need to have,
contrast
like,
it with?
brown fur on his costume for you
Yes.
to say like he's dressed as a bat?
You remember the Return of Bruce Wayne, the first issue where he kills a giant bat?
Yes,
and he wears
yes,
it.
and-
Yes, then
yeah.
he's dressed as a bat.
So Man-Bat is Bat.
He's better at Batman than Batman is.
So, are you saying no superheroes dress as? Well, what other? So Black Panther is not dressed as a panther.
Got those claws.
I mean,
Claws, ears. What? Got the right. He's black, like a Black Panther.
Yeah.
I'm talking about his costume.
Yeah.
I like how you had to clarify there what you were talking about.
I don't know if I made it better or worse by saying that.
I mean, he doesn't have any paws. I don't know.
Doesn't have any paws.
Look, I think Bob is leaning towards my side, but I totally interrupted you. Do you have any idea what you were saying?
Yeah, the opening from the Bob Dylan montage, the punching of Joe Chill, and that whole thing.
The Batman
origin story twist thing. Yeah. Again, I want to believe it's just kind of a subtle nod, because if you combine that whole scene of, like, you know, Night Owl 1 preventing Batman's parents dying, but you have Batman comic hung up on the wall up behind the theater, like, that doesn't make any sense. So I have to just kind of lean toward, that's just a fun nod, because canonically I don't think that makes any sense whatsoever.
I'm inclined to agree with that.
But still a cool, you know, a cool nod at comics past. I've got another scene that I absolutely love, if I can mention it quickly.
By all means, please do.
It's more a moment than anything. And I think it was used in every trailer and every commercial for this movie. But the scene where Ozymandias is in his office and he has the, you know, all sorts of suits basically visiting him, and then the assassin comes up the elevator to you know, quote unquote, take him out, which we learn later was all faked and all that. But
do we learn that later? Listen, I mean, I can't go back to the first time I saw this movie. It's over a decade ago. But I'm watching it now, and I'm like, this is obvious as hell that it's set up, and he's feeding him a suicide tablet himself. Is that obvious because we know? Or is it, like, very badly acted? Did you think you knew the first time?
I don't think I did. I gotta be honest, because even rewatching it, I couldn't quite remember how they were going to explain that off.
What the twist?
Yeah, I knew he was hired by him in some way, shape, or form, but I couldn't remember if he was not aiming for Ozymandias and was trying to take out everyone else and just made to look like it, or if he was paid to do it, but he knew, you know, Ozymandias was, is just so brazen, he knew he could take him out already.
Hell of a performance, though. Don't bite down, you son of a bitch. You know, that American accent.
But the one moment in that whole scene that I adore is when, you know, he moves to the side of the businessman. Businessman gets, you know, shot through the head, basically. And then Ozymandias grabs that pole that holds up, like, the rope. Yeah, that holds up the little red ropes, you know, in a hallway. And just in the fastest swing possible,
obliterates that.
Obliterates him. And I don't care how many times I've seen it. Like I said, I think it's in every trailer and every commercial of him just hitting this thug with this stick mid, you know, the classic, like, Superman pose, like, one knee, one hand on the ground, but pole in the other hand. It's such a great shot. There's a lot of standout action scenes in this movie, and this probably isn't even the best one because it's just a one-punch fight scene. But that move says so much about him as a character, that he's in it as much for the bravado as he is for the fight. And it's great, you know. And it even
it's you got to sell the show. You can't
got to sell those action figures too.
You got, I mean, and not only that, but he's got to sell the reality of the situation too. Like, he's got to make it seem like, you know, he was in danger and he jumped in and saved almost everyone as quickly as possible.
Kayfabe, brother, you got to keep it, you know. You can't. Yeah.
No, don't work yourself into a shoot, brother.
No thigh slaps here, folks. Yeah, you're right. It's just an outstanding shot for something so simple. I imagine, like, there's a script of this movie that said, and Ozymandias grabs a pole and he hits the assassin. And then Zack Snyder was like, all right, hold my beer. Like, I'm going to make this the most memorable shot. It's one of those things that plays to Zack Snyder's strengths. Like, he's,
1000%.
as far as I know, doesn't come from commercials and music videos, but he reminds me of directors that have that flair of, visual storytelling, taking something simple and making it as dynamic and exciting as possible. And whenever the story calls for it, he always rises to the occasion. And yeah, it's such a small, I'm glad you called that out, because it is ultimately a small detail in this movie, but it is, like you said, it's all over the marketing and is just instantly memorable.
Also, yes, Zack Snyder absolutely does come from music videos.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me.
That totally makes sense, yeah.
Okay. Like, he himself came from a music video, is what you're saying,
Yeah,
right?
he came out of a music video.
The take on
but then he
like
also
that.
shot the My Chemical Romance music video for their cover of Desolation Row in this movie, so he dipped back slightly.
I love,
Nice.
Bob, you said you're a huge Bob Dylan fan. I am as well. There's 3 Bob Dylan songs in this movie, and I don't know if that's, like, intentional, because Bob Dylan's, like, an American folk hero.
Are there 3?
We've got the actual, only one of them is actually sung by
Oh, of course,
Bob
All Along the
Dylan,
Watchtower,
credits.
yeah.
Then we have All Along the Watchtower, the Jimi Hendrix cover, and then the My Chemical Romance cover, which was for this movie that plays during the credits. So I don't know what they were trying to say there, other than like that's as Americana as you can get is Bob Dylan. If you can tell the history of America, like you've got to have Dylan tracks, I assume, is kind of the thought process behind that.
Yeah. Also, just real quick, a couple song shout-outs. I had several notes about it. That's Incredible, playing over the comedian getting killed in his apartment, is just such cool, duality there. The Bob Dylan song, I've gushed about it for minutes on end, so I won't go any further there. I think it's Paul Simon, maybe it's Simon and Garfunkel, Sound of Silence at the comedian's funeral is
Yes.
gorgeous. Just
In a movie full of needle drops, that one is steals the show for a needle drop. If that's a thing, it's perfect though. It gets the tone, the feel, the mood, the setting, and they keep going back to his funeral, and that's like the thing that holds it together. It's so good.
Just like we mentioned, the organ music that Andrew went into during the Dr. Manhattan sequence, and then the last one I wanted to shout out was the Hendrix song, All Along the Watchtower, which I think. It's so cool because that's such an iconic, like, 70s Vietnam War song. Every movie about the Vietnam War is like, helicopter going over the jungle. That's the song that they're going to play. Like, it's such a trope.
Yep.
But it was fun to do it in this one.
That and Fortunate Son.
Yes, 100%. Like, those are that's your, Vietnam War movie starter kit. Like, that's what you're going to put in there. But the fact that they did this when they were in the Antarctic was such a cool flip of just like so many things in this movie. Like, we know what you're expecting, and this isn't going to be it.
No.
During the Vietnam scene, because there's a Vietnam scene, they played the World War II song, like the number 1 World War II song.
Well, actually,
The Flight of the Valkyries.
That sequence is from, I believe that was paying heavy homage to Apocalypse Now, where that song is used.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Which is Vietnam.
Which is Vietnam. I thought it was a little on the nose to use it during Vietnam, given Apocalypse Now. But there's some interesting classical, like I mentioned the Philip Glass score, but we get Flight of the Valkyries there. We also get the intro to Mozart's Requiem towards the end of the film too. So like this movie has a lot of needle drops, and some are very old. Before needle drops were a thing, and before music was on a thing to listen to with a needle.
Also, I keep saying one more shout out, but there's so much of this movie I really like. The trailer to this movie, or at least one of them, had a song that I don't think is in the movie at all. It's The Beginning is the End from...
Is the beginning.
The beginning
is the end is the beginning. Which is a remix of their own song, The End is the Beginning is the End.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know it was a remix.
Perfectly not confusing.
Which makes for such a great trailer. Maybe one of the most watched trailers for me personally.
100%.
Because I think that was the one they put with Dark Knight. And so it was immediate, like when I got home, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to have to watch that again. Because I saw Dark Knight at least 3 times in the theater. So it was like, that is burned in my brain, like every shot from that trailer.
Same. I first heard about not only this movie, but Watchmen in general when I saw the Dark Knight midnight premiere. And you're right, because you see Archie coming out of the water and that song hits and you're like,
Boom, boom,
what
boom, pow.
is this?
Oh.
Yeah, it's so good. So I immediately, let's see, what was this, 2009? I guess I went to iTunes and I got that track. I was like, I got to have this in my rotation. That's before you could just subscribe to a whole music service. You had to buy a track.
Oh, yeah.
But I started listening to that song. I watched this trailer so many times and I tried to find out as much as I could about Watchmen before I went and saw the movie. But yeah, that is one of my most watched trailers. I can still go back to it and like get some of those feelings back. I mean, there's a great shot of Night Owl like dropping out of Archie like onto the street in slow motion that I remember from the trailer. Just such iconic images. Yeah, wonderful trailer. Great song choice.
Yeah. Just
It is strange it's not in the movie itself, but perfect for the trailer.
That happened. I think that happened with Guardians. I think one of the Guardians movie had like Spirit in the Sky in the trailer, and then it wasn't in the movie. It was, you know, in a movie full of 70s needle drops. It skips the one from the trailer. But but yeah, I haven't rewatched that trailer, and I don't remember this trailer like you guys do. I guess I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch it.
Part of my
I
life.
literally rewatched it last night after I finished watching Watchmen. If you need to find it on YouTube, it's Watchmen trailer number 3. Because I looked up 1 and 2, and they're good, but it features that Glass soundtrack. Sorry, forgetting the first name there. But yes, Philip Glass. Thank you. I was going to say Todd Glass. That's a different thing altogether.
That's a comedian, right?
Oh, yeah, that is.
The guy that looks like Fred
Yeah,
Flintstone.
that's the one. Leave that in. That's good. Watchmen trailer number 3, or theatrical trailer number 3, something like that. You'll find it. It's
cool.
Fantastic.
I'll check it out.
You know, the movie and story is truly like an ensemble cast, ensemble story. It's hard to really say this person's the lead of the movie. You kind of just have your own favorite character. But they do rely pretty heavily on Rorschach because he has this journal and he does the narration, and if comedian is the inciting moment of the story, he's what carries it through and pushes it through because he comes up with the idea that someone's knocking off masks, and he goes to all these other characters. That's how we're introduced to the characters, because he's going to warn them about someone killing masks. And it's funny that the narrator of this movie is so bad at talking in grammar in English and speaks in like these broken sentences, but it's so memorable and delivered so well. The scene where he breaks into Dan's Night Owl's house, and Night Owl comes home and he's like just in his kitchen eating beans.
2 cans of
Some
beans.
of the most memorable scenes. You want me to heat those up for you? Fine, like this. And he gets the pen. He's like, "Is that bean juice?" "Human bean juice." Like, what a line. And the one that made me write down the note that as Clint Eastwood is whenever Night Owl's like, "How do we even know it's, you know, they knew he was a superhero? What if it was just a burglar?" "Ordinary burglar killed the comedian. Ridiculous." Perfect. Again, it's not even like a sentence. It's just these fragments. Yeah. But you get the idea, and this is the narrator of our story. I imagine I would love to see at the end of this movie, the guy at the newspaper gets Rorschach's journal. That's like the beginning of the movie. Yeah. I would love him to like open it up, and it's just like a 5th grader in crayon like, writing this the whole time. Just the worst handwriting.
I think you see him writing at some point, and it's like doesn't look bad. It looks like it's just like if it's one thing he could do, it was write things down.
The reverse would also be funny. It's the most elegant cursive you've ever seen.
Calligraphy written down.
Dearest Elizabeth.
Detailed portraits of every character.
I hope my letter finds you well in this time.
At one point, he refers to Richard Nixon as Tricky Dick. Is this a thing from real life? I'm just ignorant. Is that
yep.
Okay. I rewound that like 3 times. Like, what the hell is he saying? I put on like closed captions, like Tricky Dick. What? But apparently it's a common thing, and I'm just dumb. So thanks for letting me know.
There's an interesting bit too. Again, just building out those. One, we didn't mention it, but Rorschach's flashback where he like becomes Rorschach. Like the moment he talks
so
about
dark.
Where he's like Walter Kovacs died that day, and then I became Rorschach. Like it's the moment the persona just consumed him. Just extremely well done, but extremely uncomfortable. Yeah. Like but like again, he's got the mask on the whole time, but the body language he's using and everything just sells what he's experiencing. Because like, you know, when you can't see a person's face and he's like going through this transformation, like you could say it's tough to see it, but you still see it with him. Like you see like he's shaking with like rage at this guy after what he's done, and he can't handle it, and he finally succumbs to it, and that's when it becomes Rorschach. But what was interesting is at one point it's when Comedian and Dan are like breaking up that riot, and he drops down and they're dispersing the crowd. Speaking more to, I'm guessing, Chris, your lack of knowledge regarding Richard Nixon. He says, "I haven't had this much fun since Woodward and Bernstein." Now,
You're just assuming that I don't get that reference, Andrew.
yes.
You're absolutely right. Enlighten me, please.
Well, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein were the people who basically exposed Richard Nixon's Watergate break-in.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I've seen Forrest Gump. Yeah.
You have. So
Yeah.
they're keeping me awake. But it implies that the government sent Comedian to kill Woodward and Bernstein or do something to them before they exposed Richard Nixon, which is part of why he's been in office so long.
Awesome.
But again, just a little note there that I thought was interesting, because I didn't even catch that. Like going back and just seeing that apparently the government just has Comedian knock off all these people that might threaten.
He goes for
the status
JFK.
quo,
He
kills
defends
JFK,
Nixon,
defends Nixon. Who knows? Wins Vietnam or part of the group that wins Vietnam for us. Like it's again these subtle things that are building out. Just even though it's 1985 and you're still in the United States, this world is different, and it's little stuff like that that I always think is interesting. But yeah, the not knowing Tricky Dick reminded me that, oh yeah, here's more Nixon trivia we can see if Chris knows.
which starts our game show, Nixon Trivia. All right, question one. Though I will say from that the Rorschach scene where he's in with the psychiatrist doing the Rorschach test. Just like you said, the like little snippets of dialogue that Rorschach has, where they show him the Rorschach test, it flashes to this, unbelievably like gory, awful imagery, and then it just cuts back to a close up of his face going, butterflies.
Yeah, like deadpans, just deadpans,
clouds, and the psychiatrist not believing it for a single solitary second, but like, what can he do?
Right.
Also, maybe again, I haven't really seen this movie that much, but I never put together that was the same. That psychiatrist was the one at the end when they're showing New York getting hit by the Dr. Manhattan bomb.
Well, Bob, they do something very subtle, where his briefcase opens up and a Rorschach test fly around him. And so I
really should have caught that, but only upon this rewatch was I like, oh yeah, I don't know why I never put that together. Maybe I did, and I just don't remember it. I'm going to say that so I can save face here. But either way,
that is,
nice.
In all honesty, I forget that too. I'm like, oh yeah, he pops up again, and we do get a little bit more of that character in the extended cut. Again, I'll keep teasing this other version of the movie for you. That kind of drives it home a little bit more. So it's not like they're just bringing up a random character at the end. But yeah, nice little callback there. Going back to Vietnam, there is a scene that I really like, even though it's horrible. And first of all, for this podcast, I watch a lot of these movies with my daughter. She's 11, and, we let her watch some PG-13 movies, and they're usually not too bad. And then I know Watchmen's rated R, and for a second, me and friend of the show, my wife, were like, well, I don't know, can she watch that? And I was like, well, let me think. There's some nudity, there's some F-bombs. And then I watched the movie again, and we get to something like Rorschach's flashback to killing a pedophile. I'm like, oh, no, she can never watch this, ever. She can, that's not...
Never.
I could not imagine, sitting on the couch, my daughter next to me, and trying to explain some of these things. So, not for kids, this one. But
Nope.
there's a scene in Vietnam that is simultaneously one of the most awful scenes for the comedian, but also... I don't know if it gives me empathy and makes me like him, but it just says so much about the character. And it's whenever a Vietnamese woman confronts him in a bar because she is pregnant with his child, and he just totally dismisses her, calls her awful names. I mean, it's truly vile stuff. And he ends up shooting her dead, kills her. And Dr. Manhattan's there, and he screams out, don't do it, and kind of acts like feels bad about it, and the comedian just sees right through it. And his lines here are so poetic. He's like, you could have turned the gun into steam, the bullet into mercury. Like, you could have stopped me and you didn't. You're detached. You don't care. And the idea that the comedian is always someone, as Rorschach says, sees society's true face and is a parody of it. I mean, he's ultimately, I don't know if it's, you call him a nihilist or maybe pessimist, but he sees things as they are and doesn't find much hope in it. And you look at this world and you're like, well, I kind of get it. Like, I kind of get how someone being used as a tool and a weapon has to experience and live through all these things is going to come up being like this awful person. So again, that one scene, we see him doing something awful, but we also come away with it being like, well, yeah, I mean, that's the life that you're in, man. I kind of, I don't condone it, but I get it.
That's where I mean, that's the sense of humor, essentially. That's where, at least at that point in his life, the whole joke of the comedian comes from, is basically he looks around at everything around him and all he can do is laugh because he's like, this is a joke. This is hilarious. This, like, trying to reconcile all of it, it can't be anything but funny to him. And that's equal parts maybe enlightening, but it's also sad. It's heartbreaking. You see what this man is and what he's become. It's a heck of a thing. Yeah.
It does a great job also of spreading the wealth is a weird phrase for it, but like showing that in a lot of superhero movies, one person is the villain. That's it. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's just what the story that they're telling is. But in this one, I think it would have been very easy to just say, the comedian is the villain. And there's no way you can do that, because Rorschach is a psychopathic murderer as much as he is oddly likable at the same time. Like, he has a lot of faults and a lot of flaws, and you could kind of see him as a bad guy in certain parts. Same with Dr. Manhattan. Like, he's, ends up being a tool more than anything. Not a tool like a disparaging thing, but like a tool like a utility.
The classic definition of the word tool.
He ends up being, used in that way. But he's kind of a villain as well, and so is comedian, and so is a lot of these characters. So is Ozymandias, but is he also kind of, the sympathetic villain / hero at the end of the day? Like, there's so many layers into all these characters. Like I was going to say Night Wolf. Geez, that's a Mortal Kombat character. Night Owl 2 is kind of the most, I don't want to say flawless, but like he's the clearest good guy in the movie. And, everybody else to a certain extent has so many different flaws. And that Vietnam bar scene does such a great job of telling it flat out. This is, they're not showing it with subtlety there. It's just like, you could have saved this and you didn't. And that makes you almost as, copiable into all of this as I am. Obviously, it doesn't dismiss anything that comedian does. He's still an absolute scumbag, but like, you leave that scene going, yeah, a lot of these people aren't heroes. They might call themselves that, but they're definitely not. And it comes early enough in the movie where it does color a lot of the rest of the movie.
Yeah, definitely, as Andrew's been saying, a theme of the movie, right? These heroes aren't truly heroes. They're more a product and a symptom of the world and a reflection of it, and that's not necessarily a good thing. And I love you saying that, like, Night Owl is the most just good, trying to be good, because the showdown, not the showdown, but the confrontation he has with Ozymandias at the end of the movie, at the very end, after he's done the horrible thing, after Rorschach is dead, most characters, I mean, even Dr. Manhattan's like, I don't condone it or condemn it, but I understand it. And a lot of characters are kind of coming around to that, like, well, it's peace. And Night Owl is the other end of the spectrum as Ozymandias, because he's like, peace based on a lie. Like, you haven't saved humanity, you've deformed it. And that's one of my favorite scenes of his from a performance perspective, because like his voice is like strained and almost like cracking because his emotions coming out of him at that time. It's so good. And it's a movie you walk away from where every character is a different shade of gray. And not just because this is a movie directed by Zack Snyder. That's how all his movies look. But its morals are over the place. Like
Right.
the world itself and their actions and the characters. There's kind of clear-cut bad guys, and I think maybe everyone would watch this movie and agree there's good guys and bad guys, but disagree on which one's which.
I think that's a good way of putting it. The book is obviously, like I said, we're deconstructing the myth of the superhero. And I mean, most of these characters are based off of characters from a company called Charlton Comics. A lot of them have like direct analogs, and that was kind of in the 80s. DC got the rights to those characters and kind of was like, hey, Alan Moore, what do you want to do with them? And he hands them Watchmen, and they were like, whoa, maybe don't use them, kind of come up with new things. So like Dr. Manhattan is Captain Atom, and the comedian is Peacemaker, coming soon to HBO Max. But
fun.
it's and all of them, like Rorschach is the Question, and Silk Spectre is Nightshade. A lot of things. Night Owl is Blue Beetle. Like, it's a lot of things like that where there's these analogs of these characters, and so they're all based off of these actual costumed superheroes. But Alan Moore wanted to like rip apart what it meant to be a superhero. What, like, look at it. What kind of person would be a superhero, quote unquote? What kind of person would want to do this? And in some cases, you'll find that awful people want to do this because being a superhero is just their excuse to kind of let themselves go to their vices or their inhibitions or whatever. And like with Ozymandias, it's 100% the ends justify the means. Whoever gets lost in the way of me accomplishing my goal it's an allowable offense, essentially, because there is no other option. He doesn't believe there's a better way to do it, so anything that happens in the process is acceptable. And there are people who aren't necessarily going to find fault with that.
Yeah.
They're going to say, well, if the goal is saving billion, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And down to Rorschach, where like Rorschach, like when he's beating up Moloch, you're like, this is an 80-year-old man. Like, genuinely watching that scene, I was like, what are you doing? Like, what are you accomplishing by doing this? But at the same time, as far as Rorschach is concerned, it's black and white. You're a villain. You're always going to be a villain. I don't need to treat you with respect because of what you have done. And again, there are people who aren't going to find fault with that. And all of these shades and all of these characters, it's all on purpose. It's all the point, essentially. Like, who becomes a superhero? Who would want to do this? And in some cases, you come in with the most noble of intentions, but how long does that last? Like, how long do you stay noble? How long do you keep doing the right thing before, in the comedian's case, the reality of the situation either wears you down or who you really are starts to shine through? So it's a lot of that comes through here with these characters. A lot of these performances bring that nuance. And yeah, it's pretty well done.
Where do you say these characters came from? They're based on
Charlton Comics.
Charlton.
Charlton.
Bob, you know what's amazing? I promise you, Andrew just knows that. He didn't research. He rolled out of bed and started recording this podcast. He just knows.
I came straight from a hockey game. Like, I've done nothing else today.
This is going to be a Wikipedia rabbit hole that I'm going to go down because I didn't know any of this, and that's absolutely fascinating.
Alan Moore writing this 12-issue miniseries. We know it as a graphic novel now because it's been collected for so many years, but just 12 issues, and it's a dense 12 issues, but the amount of lore and world building, and you've literally got separate generations of superheroes that relate to each other in different ways, and the storytelling, it is insane that he started from basically scratch. I know you're saying these characters at least are based on the characters.
They were blank slates
the world,
for the most part.
The world he's building is from scratch, and he creates this, masterpiece. We can just go and call it that. That's what everybody's been calling it for 30 plus years. It's one of the most important comics in comic book history. Is insane that like one man's brain could do that. And I love, obviously the movie's got to cut some stuff out, but I love the little snippets we get of just two characters paired up and they were partners at some point. We get Night Owl and Comedian at some point, but Night Owl and Rorschach is such a good odd couple that is my favorite team up. And the juxtaposition between their styles is the best whenever they're at the bar and they're interrogating this guy. He's holding a shot glass and Rorschach just squeezes his hand and breaks the glass in his hand. And then Night Owl says, "Everybody stay calm. We'll try to keep this brief."
He's like the dad. He really is like the dad. It really comes through. He's the guy that's like, come on, guys. I hate it when mom and dad fight, like that sort of thing. He always wants to handle things as nicely as possible, whereas Rorschach is like, I will break your wrist if I think you're going to tell me what I need to know. And yeah, that stuff all makes for great pairings, and this cast too has a great chemistry with each other.
Yeah.
Like you buy like Dan and Laurie together, you believe it. Like Rorschach and Dan together, you buy that all of these people have these existing relationships, and that they're not just trying to fake it. And yeah, it's the Rorschach Night Owl one is definitely a particular highlight.
Yeah,
It's very
they're
good.
literally just together for that small stretch of the movie, but I audibly laughed at that bar scene because it's so 2 points. One where they're like, Rorschach walks in and asks, anybody know about this pyramid? Something.
They all stop
Everybody looks to the one guy at the bar, and it's like, I buy you all around, and this is how you repay me.
Yeah.
And then Night Owl's like, we'll just be.
Please disperse.
just be
There's
a
nothing to
second.
see here.
As Rorschach is crushing glass into this man's hand is just like it's so funny. It really is, especially after so much of that movie. Like it's great. It's great.
I do like that the relationship between them is interesting too, because Night Owl is one of the only people you actually kind of see Rorschach like apologize to.
Yeah.
Like Night Owl is like they have this kind of blow up where Rorschach is like, gotta start beating down contacts and like gotta start finding out information on all of this, and Dan kind of finally lets him have it. He's like, nobody does anything because they're afraid of you, and Dan is finally at this point like, well, I'm not afraid of you. I don't Dan is confident enough at this point to kind of be in that place, and that's the one moment in like the whole movie where Rorschach kind of stops and is like, I'm sorry. Like I have not appreciated enough what you've done for me. And it just adds another layer to it, because he's not like that with anybody else. Not necessarily for any good reason. I mean, he doesn't have a reason to have that rapport with anyone else, but the fact that Dan is the one person that kind of that can get through the facade a little bit, because he says he's just Rorschach, but there's still something under there, and Dan is kind of the one person who can still kind of get to it.
There's a great beat in that scene. Even it's kind of not foreshadowed necessarily, but when he stops by Dan's apartment earlier and he's leaving through that like subway tunnel, and Night Owl starts to go like, oh, there's a door, and Rorschach kind of cuts him off mid sentence, like, I remember. Like, again, implying this whole friendship or at least working relationship that they had previously. But yeah, the scene that you mentioned, there's a great beat where Rorschach puts out the hand for the handshake. Dan shakes his hand, and then Rorschach just keeps it there for an extra second. Like, you can tell from the body language that like Night Owl's looking to break it, but Rorschach kind of holds it for one extra second. And so Night Owl like puts his other hand on his forearm just to be like, it's okay. Like, that was the most he could emote in that moment, was just like really squeezing that hand. And great, no line said, great physical moment. Like, great.
So if I were to number all of my favorite scenes, we got number 1, where it's Dr. Manhattan flashback, number 2, opening credits, number 3, we're coming back to Dr. Manhattan. I love his scene on Mars, where he regains faith in humanity, but that attachment to humanity through Laurie, because I think it is just so well written and so well delivered, where ultimately, again, we mentioned it earlier, he puts his hand on Laurie and allows her to experience life as he does and kind of see her story simultaneously. And she puts these different pieces together throughout her life to realize the comedian is her father. And what that does for Manhattan is to think of these two people, one being the horrible, awful comedian and one being her mom, Sally. As he puts it, it's you and only you that emerged. To distill so specific a form out of all that chaos, it's like turning air into gold. A miracle. And specifically, the line, it's like turning air into gold, it's so well written, it's so good, it's so poetic, and his delivery, he's almost getting choked up. He's almost like in disbelief. Yeah. And again, we mentioned it talking about his character, like any inflection of him is extrapolated tenfold because of how reserved he is. And for him to feel that much emotion by looking at this beautiful woman that he loves and thinking about where she came from and the miracle of life being like new to him again. I think it's such a well-written scene. And for a movie filled with very well executed action sequences, to have like these lines of dialogue matter so much and stand out so well, like it really says a lot about the writing and performances.
Yeah.
No, I agree. It's like we were talking about the inflections before, but just that speech of it's just the idea that in becoming so detached from humanity, he kind of lost sight of what was right in front of him, essentially. Because, he reaches that breaking point where he just is so above it that the nuance of existence and, like you said, just the sheer, even removing the context, the existence of a single person, all of the things that have to play into any single person existing, all of the people that have to be in the right place at the right time and the right circumstances. And that's not even getting into like the genetic piece of it, where you've got all these different combinations at play. He loses sight of the miracles in front of him because he gets so detached. So that's, again, what's the thing he says? I was wrong, which Dr. Manhattan has never admitted fault ever because he doesn't see himself as wrong. So to actually be able to have that self-reflection and see it and be like, oh, it was right in front of me the whole time. It's a powerful sequence. It's very, very good. And yeah, Billy Crudup sells it fantastically, especially for just being his voice.
Yeah.
And kind of his face, sort of.
It's like the most romantic almost that you ever see Dr. Manhattan being. Because clearly, like, those flashback scenes at the carnival and all that kind of jazz,
Yeah,
sure.
Sure.
It's great, but like, him as a human versus him as this being is clearly so separate in mentality that this is the only time that you see those little cracks shine through. And it's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's great.
And then I love, basically that scene leads to him going along with Adrian's plan, which he kind of has to because it's already been executed. And it leads to him having to kill Rorschach, which we talked about earlier. But I love Rorschach's line, "Suddenly you discover your humanity. Convenient." Calling him out, like, now you care. Like, you could have done so much to stop this, had you not given up on humanity. But
I've been trying to tell you for literally days.
Now, Andrew, the end of this story is drastically different from the book, and it's really the only time the movie veers this drastically from the book. Now, Bob, you're nodding your head. You said you hadn't read the book, but I assume you know what I'm referring to.
This comes up often in criticism of this movie, so that's the only reason I know it. But
let me prep you guys for a hot take.
Hang on, hashtag Positivity Podcast. I think we're on the same train here. The movie's better.
Yeah, I think the ending of the film fits in better with the concept that it's exploring.
100%.
I think like that change is obviously one of the things that's
hotly debated,
heavily noted. And the irony is that if you ever watched the Watchmen TV show they did on HBO a few years ago, it functions as a sequel to the book, which means it has the squid monsters. So you're watching a live action Watchmen show that is a sequel to a book, not the live action movie that it's based off of. But it's...
So just to catch anybody up, essentially, and I'm super paraphrasing, but in the book, Adrian assembles a team of scientists, and you see them throughout the book. They're working on a project, and that project is to create a giant squid monster that is dropped onto the city. And that's it. And then the world assumes, oh, this is an alien attack. We have to band together in case there's another alien attack. And it's as random as it sounds, and it's very strange. And you get the idea, but like I've got some problems with it. For one, there's the giant alien flops. Like it didn't really scream attack to me. And two, it's a little bit lazy. For as much as I'm praising Alan Moore's writing, that a group of scientists get together and they create a giant squid. Like that leap right there in a
doesn't it have like a psychic blast or something too that kills a bunch of people?
A lot of people die. Yeah, it's out of nowhere, and
it's not just a squid monster. There's a little bit more.
Okay, all right, I'm selling it short. I apologize.
Come on,
now it's cool. But to change that attack to look like Dr. Manhattan is such a nice, neat bow to put on the
It really
story
is.
and fold back in on itself and give that much more reason for Dr. Manhattan to go along with it. It's like, oh, I have to leave the planet because that is necessary for your plan.
If you're going to sell this, yeah.
It just makes so much more sense to me.
I agree. I think especially within the frame of like, and you could say the irony is that there is an episode of The Outer Limits called The Architects of Fear that has this exact same ending. And that was actually why the editor of the comic, Len Wein, didn't like this ending. Len Wein being a very legendary comics creator in his own right. He kind of said, he was like, this is what happens in this episode of The Outer Limits. He's like, and Alan Moore, I guess, had never seen it, didn't care, and kept the ending.
Alan Moore watched TV? Yeah, right.
Yeah, but it was interesting to kind of see that flipped for this. And Snyder kind of said he didn't really like the visual imagery of like doing the giant squid, and then you'd have to like explain the giant squid and kind of build. He's like, you kill the momentum of the film having to like quantify and explain this while still having it be a surprise. Whereas by adding in the energy subplot, which is what builds to this, you get it throughout the film. It doesn't derail the film, and then you get what is, I feel, like you said, I'll tactfully say it makes the visual storytelling of the film a lot cleaner, and just makes it much more circular. And then, like you said, adds into why John would then be like, oh, well, if there's a time to go explore the universe, now is it, because I can just disappear for a while.
Yeah.
That ending that change does get criticized, and I'm not going to say, if you want your Watchmen movies to be 100% the story screen to page, then yes, I can't fault you for being a little frustrated at the change there. But I think, like I said, bare minimum for the visual storytelling of a film, I think that is a much better way to do it.
Yeah.
I've got to imagine, because the epilogue for this movie is back at Sally's house, and it starts with her TV screen showing the intro to The Outer Limits, which I've got to imagine is like an homage to the story that you're telling here.
Makes sense.
I never knew until you told that.
I would be very hesitant to think that it was a coincidence.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. Again, knowing it tangentially, I think this is just a neater way to do it. Just like you said, it makes the motivations of Dr. Manhattan seem more just, maybe slightly, in the movie, that he's working on this energy source, quote unquote, for Ozymandias, and it makes sense of it makes that twist at the end even feel a little bit more powerful, because like, oh yeah, Ozymandias is working on this thing, this thing with Dr. Manhattan that is helping save the world and get rid of fossil fuels and
cleaner energy. We're gonna make the
yeah,
world
exactly.
better. Yeah.
It makes him look like the good guy until he clearly isn't. Until he pulls his Thanos moment. Very much Thanos before Thanos kind of moment of like, let's kill a lot of people to help all the rest. I don't know.
Well, and I like too that by doing that energy subplot the way they do, they also build in like the idea of why John can't see it, because he is essentially creating his own energy to do this. So it ends up clouding his own view of that moment in time, and he doesn't actually see past it. So it was also a clever way of building that in, because that would be the question. It's like, well, how would he not know that this is going to happen? But then you build in that kind of story reason with the energy source for that. And then by staging it against the nuclear holocaust, John never thinks anything is weird, because he just assumed that all the nuclear warheads are going to set off a bunch of problems, and that's why he can't see into the future. So just a very efficient way to kind of tell that part of the story.
Agreed.
Well, look, fellas, my final note on this movie is that Night Owl's Arctic owl suit is awesome.
Pretty dope.
And if I were collecting action figures, that's the one that I would. That's the special Comic-Con exclusive edition that I would want. Why does he have that? He's prepared for anything. I don't know.
He knew they were going to the Antarctic. Why wouldn't he have
So he developed it in like 10 minutes and then took off?
He may have already had it. He was Night Owl,
Andrew,
man.
the most unrealistic thing about this movie is that owl suit. But
he dressed like an owl.
It looks awesome.
It's the whole point.
But it's why is he so ready for the Arctic or the Antarctic?
Would Batman be ready for the Arctic?
Yeah, but that's Batman. That's his thing.
Why is Night Owl? Wow.
That-
The
That's his
disrespect
thing.
shown to Dan Dryburn. How dare you?
I also do love in that scene though, where because you even see Night Owl has his original armor or his original suit underneath the white
Yeah.
winter suit, but Rorschach just shows up in a trench coat, and
He's
in the
normal suit,
perfect
yeah.
like foreshadow during the bean scene. Do you need to warm that up? Nope, fine, just like this. Does the exact same thing. He just
Perfect.
pops up his shoulders on the trench coat, goes, nope, fine, just like this. And he just trudges through 8 miles of Antarctic to get to this base. It's like,
I also love the idea, like, we're watching the theatrical version, right? This is as much as Zack Snyder could cut this movie down. The studio wants it, shorter and shorter, get more screen times in theaters, blah, 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 blah. But something that couldn't be cut is the fact that Archie gets frozen over, and before they go and approach Ozymandias, he has to pull the exhaust from his thrusters and put it on the fans, and it's going to defrost while we're in there. Like, why do we need to know all that? Why do we need to know like his strategy for defrosting his ship? Like, it does nothing.
I also did love that
I
little
appreciate it.
laser thing that he uses. Maybe this is more in the extended cut somewhere, but like he uses that laser twice. He uses it once off screen to get into the door of the base, which I don't think would even have been locked, but hey, maybe that's just me. They're already in the Antarctic, but he uses it to open the door to the base, and then literally Ozymandias throws a throne at him. He uses the laser thing one more time to cut a leg off of it, and then it gets smashed on the ground, and it's, I think, maybe stepped on, and then it's done. And it's like,
Yeah,
That's a
Ozymandias.
powerful tool.
it was literally
Yeah,
shot
like,
one
Where's
time.
this been the whole movie?
I love that. I thought that was so funny.
That's so funny. Yeah, he's in the Arctic. What would it even lock the door? I love the idea of them making this journey and like jiggling the handle and be like, "Damn,
Did you bring?
We
did you
tried."
bring the key?
Let's-
I love the note, like them knocking on the door, and Ozymandias is just like, who? People can do this?
the
They can just
pizza's
knock
here
at my
already. I
door?
just ordered it."
Yeah, I'm running real low on my notes too, but the last two, I think we very briefly touched on them, but like they're the two most iconic things in this movie, and I couldn't not talk about it.
Are they?
Well, we've learned we've all have different definitions.
At the tail end of this 2-hour conversing, let's get to the
Let's get
iconic parts
most
in the movie.
iconic
I mean-
parts, yeah.
You're locked in. You're locked in here with me. Like
Oh yeah,
I know we never fully
Oh, yeah.
explored it, but like, come on, like what a visceral scene. But
So
what
good.
a like this is everything Rorschach is boiled down to 30 seconds. And for some reason, I remember that prison line, like the lunch scene in there, being like very long and drawn out. I don't know why. It's like a minute scene, really. It's
Yeah,
it's
tops.
the
dump the hot grease, get your line in.
and then to
Yeah.
get dragged away, and
Get
that's
out.
it.
Yeah.
But it's like that is such a famous line from this movie, and for great reason. It's excellent.
The delivery is so good because like he's got this gravelly voice, like it's implied that's kind of just his voice, that low register gravel, like I said, smoking a pack of cigarettes. But he takes it to like another level there because he's like, I'm not locked in here with you. And then whenever he screams the second part, my Rorschach impression, "You're locked in here with me." Like it's like
Pretty good.
beyond Christian Bale's Batman. Like
Yeah.
it is this. He finds this whole other place where you're like, whoa, like this dude is like scary. And I love that he's relatively short statured. Like outside of his costume, he doesn't look intimidating, which is probably what everybody's thinking when they see him. But dump some hot grease on a dude, say an iconic line, and like you've got the respect.
No, prisoners probably ain't going to mess with you after that. Most likely.
Except they
Except they
totally
absolutely did.
And they came
Yeah.
up short.
Couple people.
Pun
They
not
did not
intended.
learn their lesson.
And the last note I had here was, I'm not a comic book villain. I triggered the bomb 35 minutes ago. Like
Arguably the most iconic line from the whole comic.
100%.
The whole-
Because
Yeah.
it's
you get to the 12th issue and then you're like, well, just the Curb Your Enthusiasm music just starts playing. They're like, well,
but it really is like I remember being in the theater watching that and not knowing that was the line.
that I can't imagine what that would be like.
I think that's part of the reason this movie really does stick in my brain, because that is such a classic trope of movies, TV shows, all genres of movies, of like,
we stop the villain just
Exactly.
in time. There's 2 seconds left on the clock.
Yeah.
Like we always get there.
The
just
red
in
wire
time.
is
Like,
cut just
yeah.
before it blows.
Or Austin Powers, Seth Green being like, "Why don't you just kill him? He's locked. Let's go shoot him. He's locked up in the other room."
It's
It's such a classic. We get there just in time. So not just to find out, did we not get just there in time? We weren't even close. Like,
it was like 30 minutes ago, I think is what he said.
35 minutes ago. Meaning that whole
35,
fight
like
scene, the whole lasering through the door,
all of it. It was already done.
None of that factored in. It was already done. They were just in the Antarctic and didn't know. And it goes down in history as such a great moment because it genuinely is. It's not an overrated thing. It's like, this is great and such a twist on the formula and genuinely so great.
I wish I could have not known that twist going in, because like I'd read the comic, because everybody and their mother was like, you got to read, like when I got big into comics, that was the thing. I was like, Watchmen, you got to read Watchmen. You got to read Watchmen. And then like, so I knew going in, I'm like, oh, and then like watching the movie, I think it definitely like inadvertently like shades how you view things. Like, cause I remember watching the movie the first time and I'm like, I'm just waiting for Matthew Good to be the bad guy, because like everything he's doing, I'm just like, yeah, he's acting like the bad guy. I was like, there's no twist here. He's gonna be the bad guy. But then I was like, oh, but I know he's the bad guy. So everything I'm watching him do is colored by that. And
especially in this universe where there's so many people doing bad things just on the regular, I really did not see it coming. And
good stuff.
It's great. It's an iconic, great ending, and the fact that I believe it goes right from that line to the streets of New York, like 20 seconds before the bomb goes off, and it just does such a great job of letting you sit in that moment. It doesn't show the reaction, because like at that point, I think Zack Snyder was like, okay, audience is gonna be like gasped for a second, maybe not quite believe it because it's coming from this guy. Let's show them that what he said is exactly correct, and like down to just random New Yorker standing there with his newspaper in hand and I'm sure a hot dog and a taxi in the other or whatever. It's great. It's brilliantly written.
The whole taxi,
the whole thing. It's
that's how you know it's from New York. Hot dog in one hand, taxi on the other. Got an accent. I'm New York in here.
It's brilliantly written. It's brilliantly shot. It's great.
And look, I'm not going to go all Ozymandias was right or anything like that, but the whole theme of this movie, or one of them, is that there's shades of gray. There's not right and wrong, and there's the case for him really not being the villain, because ultimately he was faced with the trolley problem and he pulled the lever. The world's heading towards nuclear destruction. He pulls the lever. Let's just kill a few million instead. And it's hard to imagine someone being so heartless they're able to do that. That's kind of the whole conflict of the classic problem. But is doing that, does that make you the villain? If, peace nonetheless, as he says, like, we're not going to sit on this podcast and come to an answer, because there's not an answer like this. And that's what I love about the story, the movie. Like, you finish it and you have these questions and you ponder these things. Like, it would almost be a good like date movie, because it gives you a lot to talk about afterwards. But like, you don't take your girlfriend to see Watchmen. It's not a good date movie, but it gives you a lot to talk about afterwards. Sure. And it's you could do a whole like episode of a podcast about this movie, the story.
Yeah.
It's
so almost like we have.
Is this recording? Is this on? I thought I was just hanging out with buds.
It's almost like that's the point of it.
It's great. And, a criticism, which I'm using that very lightly, is people will be like, try to discredit Snyder. It's like, well, it was, the book was good. The writing was already done for him. It's like, who cares? Like, who contributed what? It made it to your screen. Sit and watch the story and enjoy it, because it's pretty darn worth enjoying.
Translating from one medium to another is not as simple as copy paste. Like,
especially given how long this movie had tried to be made. Like, I mean, people tried making this into a movie like
Since it was published.
immediately after it was
Yeah.
published. They were like, I know Terry, we mentioned that earlier, but yeah, it's just clearly something about it was not easy to adapt. And so this guy got
Shout
it.
out
So,
David Hayter. Solid Snake himself for writing credit.
Solid Snake
Yeah.
himself writing the script.
Good on him. I knew he was a classical man right there.
Well, look, we could go on. We could do our Rorschach impressions and repeat these lines to you. But you know what? Just go watch the movie. If you haven't, it's great. It's a good time. It's worth watching. And Bob, thank you so much for joining us,
Yes,
talking to
thank
us
you.
about watching, sharing your positivity and your sweetheartedness. You're just a joy to
Oh.
talk to. And we mentioned already, you're the host of the wonderful 99 Questions podcast. Why don't you tell the people what they can expect from that show?
First off, thank you so much for having me. This is, if you couldn't tell, I love this format and I love talking movies. And I'm a big fan of this movie. So it was great to nerd out for probably longer than was expected. But man, it's a great time.
We just recorded for 6 hours. I'm not sure what I'm going to edit
Yeah.
this down to, but this is the end of a very long
Yeah, there's going to be the
recording
Buell cut, the ultimate cut, the Snyder cut of the podcast of all varying lengths.
There's actually going to be a cut where I'm completely
Yes.
removed.
The Andrew subplot, as we call it, is removed. No, for real, guys. Thank you for having me. You put on
thank
an
you.
excellent show. You really know your stuff, and I love listening to it, and I love that I could be a part of it. So thank you for that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
But yeah, I have a show that I'm quite proud of myself called 99 Questions. It is me interviewing various folks of various celebrity stature, people in the games medium, people like the Ben Hansons from MinMax, Dan Reichert from everywhere at this point, Mary Kish, Jeff Cork, people in the D&D nerddom world, the Brendan Lee Mulligans of the world, the Becca Scott, who all do kind of famous D&D stuff, people from comedians, Jeffrey James, Sam Reich from College Humor, all sorts of people. I've been
The CEO of College Humor. Like, there's
Who
brushing
could have
past
guessed?
that. Like, you've got some, like, big guests
he
here.
not only agreed to be on, but he told stories about doing drugs and riding roller coasters. So, like, listen, if that's not a selling point for you, I don't know what is. I've been very lucky for people to keep saying yes to that show, and I'm going to keep doing it because it's a ball. And so, if anyone wants to listen to me asking the same 99 questions to all of these wonderful people and many, many more, and sometimes random people on Chat Roulette, because that's and perhaps David Hayter during a episode where I interviewed nothing but people on the website Cameo. But that's a long plug. Just 99 questions. Find it on all the podcast apps. You'll see a purple and gold logo. That's me.
Yeah, we'll have a link in the show notes, so check that there. Go check out Bob's show. What I love about your show, Bob, is that it's a wonderful concept. Like, you read that, like, oh, it's very cool. Like, I'll listen to a few episodes of people that I know the guests. I want to hear their answers. But the format works so well that you start listening to episodes that you have no idea who that person is, and you're their biggest fan after listening to them talk to you and go through the questions, and it's very infectious and fascinating, and love your work. Yeah, again, check out the link in the show notes. And you recently had Leo Vader
I
on your
did.
show, which has one of the best YouTube videos ever made out there that is inspired by my favorite scene from Watchmen, and I cannot help but watch that scene in the movie and think of his video. when he's up on a
Oh, of
banana peel.
course. Oh, yes, he does the song even. How did I
Yeah.
never put that together? That's my favorite thing that he's done. Yes, Leo Vader's.
Yeah. And it's the format. It is now October 10th, 2000.
How did we talk about this movie for 2 hours plus, and I never put that.
You never put there.
I genuinely never. I maybe that's part of the reason I love that YouTube video too.
No, there you go.
See, now I'm learning things from being on this podcast.
We're all learning
Amazing.
things. Well, Andrew, that was just lovely. Chatting with old Bob Buel there about Watchmen.
Yep, good time.
Who watches the Watchmen? These guys. I've got to be the first person ever to make that joke, right?
Yeah, that's definitely never been done before.
That is comedy. That is why you subscribe to our show and go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. we always ask you to go one step farther. Leave a review for every podcast that you listen to regularly, including 99 Questions hosted by Bob Buel. It's something free that you can do that the creators of your favorite shows are certainly going to appreciate. And you can bet if you leave a review for Best of the Rest, it will be read on a future episode. Just like this review left by Daffy Fields. And Andrew, I love every listener of the show. I love you. I love everyone that leaves us a review. I love other reviews. I'm not picking favorites, but this is among one of my favorite reviews ever left for our show. Why are you looking at me like that?
Where are you going with this, Chris?
This is among one of my favorite reviews we've ever received. The title says Mystery Men. They write, I loved this episode. My older brother and I rented this movie shortly after it came out. I was about 20 and he was about 30. We weren't very close and were a little awkward around each other. We watched this movie 2 or 3 times in a row late at night, laughing hysterically and bonding. Since then, it has been one of my favorite movies. I loved your review. Thank you so much for sharing that story, Daffy Fields. That makes me feel all nice and warm inside. I love that the movie means so much to you and that our podcast maybe took you back to those times. But Mystery Men, renting that, watching it 2 or 3 times in a row, that checks out, right?
Sounds like a good time to me.
Absolutely. A lot of parallels between Mystery Men and Watchmen. A lot of hard-hitting questions asked in both team of superheroes. I mean, who's really the bad guy in Mystery Men? It's hard to say.
I mean, there's lots of shades to those characters. Some say the Sphinx is the villain of Mystery Men.
the poor man's Hooded Justice. we didn't get a chance to talk about Hooded Justice on our episode here. And granted, he has a very small part in the movie. But I love that performance. It's another performance. It's only a voice, and he just beats the crap out of the comedian at a time in the movie when you want to see him get beat up. But I don't even know who played that character, but they did a wonderful job. Have you seen the Watchmen show? I've seen the first episode, and I was like, oh, this is really good and very dark. And I feel a little sad now. I haven't made my way back to it. I think it's only like 10 episodes.
Hooded Justice is he's a big part of it, I think.
Oh, okay. Well, that's...
They dive into him pretty hard.
I will go back to it at some point. It's that first episode was a tough watch. Am I in for a tough watch all the way through? Does it stay pretty?
I don't think so. I don't think they're all that tough. There's some that definitely I can't really say without spoiling, but yeah, there's some episodes that definitely get a little heavy, but then it gets a little more comic booky.
Okay. Well, I'll check it out. I mean, I'm subscribed to HBO Max. I gotta.
There's stuff in it that I genuinely was shocked by. I was like, "What?" So definitely, I think it's definitely worth checking out.
You know what? I am gonna do just that. And Andrew, I'm gonna let you know what I think about the show. Maybe we'll talk about it in our Discord. And if you want to join that conversation, check the show notes. There is a link to join our Discord. What is Discord, you might say? It's simply a place for communities to get together and hang out, talk about things they're interested in. You can talk about episodes of the show, talk about movies we covered, or literally anything else. It is a positive, focused community, and we would love for you to be there if you are hearing my voice right now. And of course, while you're in those show notes, check out that link to 99 Questions. Give Bob Buell's show a listen. You will not regret it. And remember, maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. Follow him on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. Thanks to Mitch of Depressed to Impress for the music. Check him out on YouTube and Twitch.tv. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. It's the only way we're going to grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you. That's a wrap.
Beauty.
They are soon joined by the other heroes when Ozymandias... I'm saying that name wrong, isn't I? Ozymandias?
Ozymandias, I thought.
Ozymandias. I'm going to say it 2 different ways in this synopsis. If I didn't mention already, Bob, this is a highly edited podcast. So if you stumble or if you want to take 30 seconds to come up with the right joke, feel free to do that. And I'll cut out the dead air and we all sound really good.
Love it.
Do not make excuses for him, Andrew.
But no. John is in all times, which means he exists in the time when Total Recall is made.
Yeah. Did you see his cameo in No Way Home?
Who are we
No,
talking-
did we just guys kill the momentum with that joke? I'm sorry. He exists in all times. He shows up on No Way Home because all. Never mind.
Yeah,
I'll cut it. Yeah. That's our post-credit stinger right there. It's usually me just saying something
I
embarrassing.
love it.
There's the case for him really not being the villain because
Chris, I made a whole speech about this.
Andrew, I'm going somewhere with this. Okay, Andrew.